User, our speaker today. She's very well known, but you will allow me to just say a few words about our representative on freedom of the media at the OSCE, Ms. Dunja Mijatovic. She is one of the founders of the Communications Regulatory Agency of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and in 2007 she was elected chair of the European Platform of Regulatory Agencies. Prior to this, she chaired the Council of Europe's group of specialists on freedom of expression and information in times of crisis. Mijatovic is an expert in human rights, communications and media strategy, and regulatory and policy media framework. She has extensive knowledge of institution building in transition states and many years of experience in issues related to journalists' safety and new technologies, with the emphasis on digitalization, convergence, and internet technologies. And to guide us through the discussions today, I also have the pleasure to introduce our moderator of today's session, Dr. Andrei Richter, who is the director of the Office of the OSCE Representative on the Freedom of the Media. He is a professor and served as Media Law Department head at the School of Journalism, Moscow State University. He was born in Ukraine in 1959. He has a university degree in law and foreign languages and a doctorate from Moscow State University in journalism. He has authored numerous publications on media law that are available in different languages. Until May last year, Dr. Richter was a commissioner of the International Commission of Jurists. And with this, I would like to hand over to the moderator of the session today. So, Andrei, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Deputy Director. We begin the session, and once again, I would stress that the list of speakers is closed. We have about 70 speakers, I understand, by now. Are they 60. 60, all right, plus right of reply. So we have to limit the amount of time for each speaker to 1.5 minutes. Please keep it in mind while preparing your remarks, ladies and gentlemen. Without any further delay, I pass the floor to Representative on Freedom of the Media. She'll present her views on the results of the past year and the outlook of her activity in the year to come. Madam Mijatovic.
Thank you very much, Andrei. Thank you, Beatrice. Good morning, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, colleagues from all over the OSCE region and beyond. It's a special pleasure and honor to be here today, even though we had many opportunities to meet throughout the year, but also in the past 5 years when I had to attend this meeting in order to assess in which direction do we go when it comes to media freedom and freedom of expression. It is, can I just ask, sorry. I apologize. It is very important that before we start discussing certain issues that are related to media freedom and freedom of expression, we in a way take a pause and also look in which kind of world do we live at the moment and how this world is affecting media freedom, free flow of information, and freedom of expression of all of us, citizens. Of course, I have to focus on journalists and media workers, but what is extremely important is that we also look at the perspective of citizens, looking at those issues and trying to exercise their right to free expression. Because what I see lately, that they are affected as well in relation to free speech, to sharing information, and access to information when it comes to the government institutions in many participating states. There will be no great surprises today. Indeed, if you have been following the work of my office, you already know what I will say in the next few minutes, or maybe not. And before turning the floor over to you to hear your assessments and concerns, as we were already informed, there are many who wish to speak, and I'm the last one to stop any of you speaking. So I will try to limit my intervention today, even though I could go on for hours, even until 1 o'clock when we have to close, if I will have to mention all the interventions I had since last year this time. And on very few occasions, I welcomed certain developments in one of the participating states, good laws, some of the journalists being released, some investigations started, but that's hardly to be enough. As I said, this is the 5th time that I have spoken at this meeting. I will summarize my work in the past 12 months and outline the areas that will receive most of our attention in the coming months. Each time the message is similar, and I will try to briefly mention those issues. Media freedom is vital to every one of us because it is through the work of journalists that we get information about issues that directly affect our lives. Maybe it's at the very beginning the right time to ask the question, is that the reason they are stopped when they are trying to reveal certain issues that are related in our societies, wrongdoings of the government? Maybe. This freedom is not to be taken for granted, and once given up, it is difficult to regain. Each year, journalists put themselves in grave danger while they provide information to the rest of us. And some of them lose their life while doing so. Impunity of perpetrators of violence against journalists has become the norm. And successful and transparent investigation remains occasional, as I already pointed out. Much of the danger and limitation that journalists face come from government policies themselves. And that without resolute political will by the governments to protect free expression, our battered right to free speech will further suffer. The types of assault on free expression, as well as the lack of physical and legal safety for journalists, have also remained similar over these 5 years, and they fall in these main categories: violence and threats of violence against journalists and impunity of perpetrators, legislative restrictions leading to the obstruction of freedom of expression, both offline and online, limitations to the right of journalists. What is new this year, however, is the extraordinary frequency and scope of assaults against journalists, matched with the continued lack of consolidated efforts by the OSCE participating states to value and protect their work. Ukraine naturally comes first to my mind in evaluating the last year. Ever since the start of the crisis in Ukraine, we have been witnessing propaganda and information war as a tool of warfare dominating the landscape. The use of propaganda, and I said it yesterday and I will repeat it today, in times of conflict has the effect of nothing less than throwing a gasoline on an open flame. And in my view, the behavior of state-owned and state-controlled media in the conflict has been exceptionally reprehensible. What can be done? Apparently calling on the better nature of those involved will not work. They continue to broadcast every day. It leads us to making sure that there are several voices that can be heard and that there is more, not less, information to work with. That and an informed, media literate population that can make rational and not emotional choices may dampen the flames that the propagandists spew. Preventing people from freely forming their opinion, several actors, including governmental ones, use the media as a powerful tool to manipulate the minds and actions of individuals. Psychological operations were already very visible when I visited Crimea in March. For me, it was very personal, even though I have to stay professional. Landing to Simferopol airport was Sarajevo revisited. It was 92 again in my mind. The atmosphere, people looking at me and many other internationals that were there with hope that something will happen, orchestrated riots, and we were even detained by the so-called self-defense. We will talk about these issues more at a side event, but I cannot go on without mentioning this situation that I experienced in March this year in Crimea. And the stories I heard from journalists, and how this so-called self-defense tried to stop me speaking and tried to stop me meeting people. I urge you to look at the website of our office or follow me on Twitter to understand the volume of incidents I see: death threats, harassment, deportations, imprisonments, beatings, disappearances, abductions, and even murders. I know it sounds dramatic, but that's our reality, and I'm not trying to be dramatic at all. You just look at it, those are names of people, those are cases that I raised, those are people I met, and those are also cases I raised with governments that are all presented here. While assaults are observed in several participating states, in no country has the safety of journalists become more critical than in Ukraine. 6 journalists have lost their lives in eastern Ukraine alone during the crisis. Italian photojournalist Andrea Rocchelli and his assistant Andrei Mironov were killed by mortar fire near Sloviansk on 24th of May. Igor Korneliuk and Anton Voloshin, a journalist and sound engineer with the Russian state television and radio broadcasting company, were killed on 17th of June when they came under mortar fire near Luhansk. Anatoly Kilian, a cameraman with Russia Pervia Canal, Channel 1, was killed in the Donetsk region on 30th of June. Andrei Stenin, photographer with the state-run Russia Segonia International Information Agency, was reported missing on 5th of August while covering the armed conflict in eastern Ukraine. His remains were later discovered in the Donetsk region. Others were abducted and later released, including Olesh Komplinas and Olena Maximenko, journalists with the Glavkom and Ukrainsky Tizhden news portals, and their driver were kidnapped by people in military uniforms on 9th of March. Simon Ostrovsky, a journalist with Vice News, was abducted and beaten by people claiming loyalty to the so-called People's Mayor of Sloviansk on 22nd of April. He was released several days later. Marat Saichenko and Oleg Sidinak from Life News were detained on 18th of May by the Ukrainian military. They were held for several days and complained of brutal treatment. Hromadska TV journalist Nastya Stanko and cameraman Ilya Beskonovali were abducted on 30th of June and held for several days by separatists in Luhansk. In mid-August, journalist Anna Ivanenko and camera operator Nazar Zotsenko, both with 112 Ukraine channel, were detained by the separatists in the Luhansk region and held for more than 2 weeks. Many journalists are still missing. Sergei Dolgov, editor of Mariupol Vestnik newspaper, and Yuri Livlyansky, a freelance journalist with Zik TV, have been missing since this summer. While the situation is nothing short of critical, reporters have faced a multitude of obstacles and threats in other areas of the OSCE as well. Since our last meeting in Warsaw, I intervened more than 150 times in over 40 countries to raise alarm and provide early warning to potential threats to freedom of expression or express concerns about grave violations of media freedom. On 1st of August, journalist and blogger Timur Kushaev was found dead in Kabardino-Balkaria in Russia. The journalist who was covering events in the North Caucasus for the Dosh magazine was well known for his critical reporting on human rights issues in Russian Federation. The details of his death remain unknown. Several journalists were beaten in the OSCE region in the last year. Tatiana Chernovil, a journalist from Ukrainska Pravda newspaper, was beaten on 25th December near Kiev and suffered serious injuries. Ilgar Nasibov, a journalist contributing to several media outlets in Azerbaijan, was the subject of brutal attack on 21st of August. He was hospitalized in critical condition. Editor of Fonet news agency Davor Pašalić was brutally attacked by 3 individuals in Serbia in July, also sustaining serious head injuries. In January in Montenegro, journalist Lidija Nikicevic was attacked with a baseball bat in front of her office and sustained conclusions. Journalist Sinan Alic was attacked in Tuzla, Bosnia and Herzegovina in January. His attack follows numerous threatening text messages he received in November last year. And I can go on and on and on. Threats take many forms and shapes and remain a very effective tool to silence journalists. The car of Genka Shikerova, Bulgarian television journalist, was set on fire twice in the last year. There is a concern that the attacks are linked to her profession. A company car of the daily Viesti was set on fire and a bomb exploded outside of the offices of media outlet in Podgorica in Montenegro in February. This attack was the 5th instance when the car from Viesti was destroyed. A car belonging to Alexei Matsuka of Novosti Donbass in eastern Ukraine was set on fire in April, and the journalist had to flee to Kiev to avoid further harassment and intimidation. Dozens of journalists remain behind bars in the OSCE region, 21 of them in Turkey, 3 in Uzbekistan, and 13 in Azerbaijan, including bloggers. And let us recall that in former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, journalist Tomislav Kažarovski is still under house arrest, awaiting appeal 8 months after his conviction at first instance. In the last year, dozens of media members were assaulted by law enforcement, those who are to protect them while they were covering demonstrations. In August, US law enforcement authorities arrested and then released a dozen of journalists reporting on civil disturbances in Ferguson, Missouri. In more than 20 instances this year, journalists in Belarus were detained, questioned, and released, sometimes without protocol. In February in Bosnia and Herzegovina, police attacked a TV cameraman who was wearing media identification while he was filming a protest in front of Tuzla Canton government building. Restrictive judiciary and regulatory system have been often used to chill pluralistic debates and in some cases even silence dissenting voices. In Kazakhstan, the newspaper Pravdivaya Gazeta was closed over petty offenses such as stating incorrect publication date and other minor irregularities following the fate of more than 30 media outlets that have been closed since late 2013 in Kazakhstan. In Hungary, 4 NGOs promoting media freedom and investigative journalism, among other human rights, were raided by the authorities in August and are being investigated by the Government Control Office in a wider crackdown on 13 civil organizations receiving financial support from Norway. I also witnessed an increase in the number of countries who label NGOs, including some media NGOs, as foreign agents. And then I also ask myself, in which kind of century do we live? Besides Hungary, this is the case in the Russian Federation, and I follow the related discussions and potential adoption of similar laws in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Azerbaijan. The assets of the Latvian Public Affairs magazine were frozen following a court decision on a pending damage claim for libel. Dusan Karoli, who published an article in the Slovak weekly magazine Trend about the court case against a former police employee, faces up to 5 years in prison for libel if convicted. On 1st of July, Serbian media outlet B92 was ordered to pay damages for defamation against a public official. The court ruling followed B92's reporting on an investigation of alleged mismanagement of public funds. In May, criminal fines for defamation were handed down to 4 journalists with the Danish Broadcasting Corporation. They were fined for allegations in 2009 radio broadcast in which they criticized the Housing Association. In August, the London Metropolitan Police accessed the phone records of Tom Newton, political editor of The Sun, without the journalist's consent. Public criticism by authorities directed at individual journalists can also chill pluralistic debates in the societies. Amberim Zaman, Turkey correspondent to The Economist, and a columnist for newspaper Taraf, was severely criticized by the authorities, resulting in a smear campaign against her that has threatened her security. Ladies and gentlemen, in the last year, we continued witnessing widespread restrictions on freedom of expression online in numerous areas of the OSCE. And we are still asking ourselves if our rights are same offline and online, and also suggesting some new regulations, new laws that will probably open areas that are still gray when it comes to cyberspace. And I'm not against introduction of anything that will protect our society, that will make our societies more safe, more open, more relaxed. But what I see, unfortunately, is that all cases that I raise, at least, are very much connected to silencing critical voices. And that is something that will remain in the focus of my work in the future. While the internet has brought along state-of-the-art ways to express ourselves and seek information, the growth of this technology has also encouraged governments to censor what we say or do online. Social media platforms can also be used by the authorities or by private entities to identify individuals and monitor their online activities without consent or a court order. Targeting the fundamental rights of Twitter or Facebook's users or jailing bloggers is finding its way very quickly into participating states' policies. The situation is especially worrisome in Azerbaijan, where on 4th of July and on 27th of May, Omar Mamadov and Abdul Abilov, online activists and bloggers known for their views critical of the authorities, were sentenced to prison for 5 and 5.5 years imprisonment on charges of the illegal storage and sale of drugs. Those sentences follow sentences handed to journalist Parviz Hashimli on charges of smuggling and illegal storage of sale of firearms. Nihat Aliyev, editor-in-chief of the Azad.org news website, on various charges, including drug possessions and incitement of hatred. Sardar Alibeili, editor-in-chief of PS Nota newspaper, on charges of hooliganism, and Rashad Ramazanov, an independent blogger, on charges of illegal storage and sale of drugs. It is hard to estimate the number of blocked websites in our countries. The blocking are often based on laws where allowed to arbitrary or disproportionate blocking of content deemed unwanted by those in power. In Turkey alone, more than 50,000 websites are currently blocked, and both Twitter and Facebook were silent for weeks earlier this year, even though later on there were several landmark decisions by the Constitutional Court in Turkey actually telling authorities what is right to be done in relation to these issues. The restrictive internet law of the country was modified twice in the last 7 months, each time adding provisions that further curb online freedom of expression. Other countries also resort regularly to silencing online voices that are considered harmful or critical of those in power. In July, access to one of the most popular social platforms in Tajikistan, called Odnoklassniki, was blocked following blocking of YouTube at the beginning of June. In Uzbekistan, recent amendments to the law on informatization introduce a wide definition of a blogger and impose a wide array of responsibility, including a ban on untrue posts and reposts. In the Russian Federation, a new law adopted in April forces owners of websites and web pages visited by more than 3,000 users daily to register with the authorities and imposes additional responsibility on them for verifying the accuracy and reliability of posted information. Allow me to say a few words about my office's ongoing efforts in the field of open journalism. We are all witnessing irreversible changes in how we receive and spread information. This change has empowered people to not only have greater access to news and information, but also to become part of the news-making process. Obviously, this new practice of involving the readers and using their content stirs up a variety of questions: social, legal, regulatory, and ethical. While technological changes mean that journalism and media are irreversibly changing, as I said already, our basic human rights remain the same, and it cannot be other way. It's not just the OSCE, it's United Nations, Human Rights Council, who had very clear view on this. And at least all countries sitting in this room, 57, agreed to this resolution. So I cannot see how come we can have a different view on these issues here at the OSCE. In order to assist the OSCE participating states to deal with these challenges and at the same time honor their OSCE commitments in the field of freedom of expression and freedom of the media, my office has launched a series of discussions among experts in a number of fields that are related to open journalism. And before I conclude my speech, I would like to say a few words about the important anniversary that is approaching next year. In 2015, we will commemorate the 40th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act. It was only 40 years ago that our organizations agreed to respect and promote all universal human rights in the OSCE region. This included the understanding that we recognize the value of pluralistic debates and we give space to differing voices in our societies. In other words, we give space not only to the voices that we like, but also to the voices that we do not like and that we totally disagree with. The voices that are also telling us things that, again, we do not like. And it's very difficult to digest. Painful issues, taboos, dogmas. Should we silence those voices? A clear and loud no comes from my side. That's because we value pluralistic information and we realize that it is only through informed debate that our world can be a safe and a good place to live in. And because we trust that the views we represent will endure critical questions and we feel energized and not threatened by those who argue differently. That was 40 years ago. Today, the ongoing propaganda war slaps the enlightened approach of the Helsinki Final Act in the face by promoting only messages that serve the purpose of those in power, often resorting to blatant lies and distorting facts. I mentioned earlier, and many times, the indispensable political will needed to change the current situation. I can only repeat how every other effort is meaningless if the political will is missing. Ground pronouncements of the resolutions, conventions, decisions by the government stating over and over again, yes, we do believe, yes, it is important for our societies. And also when I have meetings, I use this opportunity because I have civil society present here, and many journalists, some of them that I met in prison. When I talk to your governments, they tell me, yes, they do respect all these rights. They do value and honor OSCE media freedom commitments. But what I see in field and what I see in your countries, it's not the picture they are trying to give me. It is also very much present a notion that whatever I raise and a certain government doesn't like, you know what they tell me? That I'm outside my mandate. That's the best possible answer. I disagree, of course, and I continue doing my job as long as I have to do it because I really, truly believe in this organization and also the commitments related to media freedom, not to mention also tremendous work done by my colleagues in ODIHR and the High Commissioner for National Minorities. We all have a role in making sure that this does not happen and we stay without our right to free expression, no matter if we are journalists or not. The role of my office in this process is to continue to raise attention to all forms of threats to freedom of expression and assist participating states in improving them. We will continue to offer assistance, to advocate for increased media literacy, provide early warning, promote the fight against harmful content, raise awareness that curbing media freedom will not decrease harmful or disturbing content, nor will it bring along the desired control of the authorities seek over a technology that by nature is not controllable. I will continue to raise my voice loud and clear wherever and whenever possible to promote more free speech, to fight bad speech, and I will publicly refute any forms of violence committed against journalists for their work and any form of abuse of the media for propaganda purposes. In conclusion, let me share with you the welcome news that for the first time since the establishment of the Office of the Representative, we operate with full house. All available contracted and seconded positions have been filled. And I would like to once again express thanks to the participating states who second our staff. So there is even more energy to raise the issues that are important in our societies and that we are mandated for. I look forward to your comments and assessments, including the views of the civil society. I join colleagues from ODIHR in emphasizing the indispensable role played by civil organizations in the efforts to improve fundamental rights. My office is among the many organizations who could not carry out its work at high level without the important input received from civil society, not to mention the trust you have in the work of my office and the way you are dealing with us and raising the cases and wrongdoings in your society. I would also like to thank the governments for cooperating with my office, to accepting my criticism, but I would also call you for more openness and more reality when it comes to issues in your own state. Only then we can see a bit of light at the end of the tunnel. If we just look back at this not very rosy situation that I just briefed you about. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Representative, for the insight in your assessment of the work to be done and done in the area of freedom of expression. We now turn to the debate. Once again, I remind that the speaking time for speakers will be 1.5 minutes. We have 58, to be precise, speakers on my list. And I request all those speakers to be concise and in order to facilitate the discussion and to respect other speakers, please stay on time. And you're welcome, as before, to provide written recommendations and written statements through the distribution system and through the distribution services at the meeting, and focus in your oral presentations on the recommendations in this field, keeping in mind the annotated agenda that was distributed among you, as well as keeping in mind the very important fact that this meeting is human dimension implementation meeting, thus focusing on the implementation of the right to freedom of expression and the role of civil society. The first speaker on my list is Sweden on behalf of the European Union.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The following EU statement is also on behalf of Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Montenegro. And we would like to also say that the list of aligned states is not final, and the full list of aligned states will be provided on the written version of this statement. The EU would like to thank the representative on freedom of the media for her presentation and call on her to keep up her excellent work. Freedom of expression remains a top priority for the EU in OSCE. In May this year, the EU foreign ministers adopted the EU human rights guidelines on freedom of expression online and offline. These guidelines underline the EU's conviction that freedom of expression and opinion and freedom of the media are necessary for an active, engaged, and informed citizenry, and that they constitute the essential foundation for democracy, rule of law, peace, and stability. They also confirm that freedom of expression applies online as well as offline. It's therefore deeply troubling that there are still countries in the OSCE where freedom of expression is being restricted. As OSCE participating states, we have all agreed to fully implement in good faith a strong body of commitments to ensure that every individual's right to freedom of expression and opinion are respected in the entire OSCE area. This right is also enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. A year ago, the discussion on freedom of expression in this setting, we pointed out that the implementation gaps were widening rather than closing. Sadly, as we review the implementation of our OSCE commitments at this HDIM, we see that this trend is one of dramatic deterioration in part of our region. This is not something that happens by chance. It's the result of deliberate actions on the part of authorities in several OSCE participating states to restrict and in some cases silence critical voices. This trend can and must be reversed, and the EU urges participating states to take immediate actions to fully implement our OSCE commitments. The recommendations to participating states, based on our shared commitments in this area, are, first, ensure respect for the right of every individual to seek, receive, and impart views and information. Second, ensure media freedom and media pluralism so that individuals can freely choose their sources of information. Third, ensure that the Internet remains an open and public forum for freedom of opinion and expression. 4, draw on the expertise of the RFOM and her dedicated team and make full use of her reports and recommendations. Events in the last few months have clearly demonstrated the continued relevance of our OSCE freedom of expression commitments as an integral component of the OSCE comprehensive security concept. The actions of the Russian Federation and of Russia-backed armed groups in Ukraine include attacks on broadcasting stations and other media outlets, illegal replacement of Ukrainian TV channels with Russian ones, as well as violence, abductions, and intimidation against journalists and others who make use of their right to freedom of expression and opinion. Together, these and other actions severely endanger media freedom and contribute to an ongoing information war, which serves to escalate the ongoing crisis. The EU strongly urges the Russian Federation to immediately put an end to these actions, which are in clear violation of both the letter and the spirit of our freedom of expression and media freedom commitments. In the ongoing crisis, several journalists have lost their lives. The European Union unequivocally condemns these killings and calls for all those responsible to be brought to justice. The EU also calls on Ukraine to do its utmost to uphold its media freedom commitments. At the same time, we join the RFOM in welcoming the positive steps that have been taken by Ukraine in the last few months, notably regarding access to information and public service broadcasting. We have also seen worrying trends in several parts of the OSCE region during the last year. In, for example, Azerbaijan and Turkey, speaking out as a journalist or as an advocate of free expression is fraught with danger of attack, harassment, legal action, detention, or imprisonment. We have seen far too many examples of this in the recent months. We have also seen how media outlets, not least those operating online, are under pressure in several countries. Regrettably, this is the case both in Kazakhstan, a previous OSCE chair, and in Serbia, the incoming OSCE chair. In this context, the EU welcomes the stated intention of the Serbian government to lead by example and calls for closer cooperation with the RFOM. We note with deep concern the trend towards a shrinking space for dissenting views within the Russian Federation and mounting pressure on those who openly agree with government policies, as well as further repressive policies that unduly restrict freedom of expression and the activities of independent media outlets, including those operating online. Excessive regulation of the Internet, amendments to the information law targeting bloggers, the use of anti-extremism and anti-separatism legislation are some examples. As the RFOM, the EU calls for a rigorous investigation of the death of journalist Timur Kushayev. Arbitrary blocking of social media sites, as well as other Internet services, is a growing problem in our region. Regrettably, it has occurred in Turkey as well as in other participating states. This clearly goes against our commitments to facilitate free and wider dissemination of information of all kinds. One should underline that EU and its member states do not have a spotless track record. As all participating states, we have our shortcomings. The EU is committed to improving and believes that free and open public debate is of crucial importance as we work to enhance our laws and practices. We stand ready to consider recommendations and engage on issues and expect others to do the same. Before concluding, the EU wishes to once again underline the great importance it places on the participation and input of non-governmental organizations in the work of the OSCE. This openness is one of the added values of our organization. Civil society actors can play an important role as a watchdog and a partner in our efforts to ensure full implementation of human dimension commitments. In order to preserve this added value, it is of fundamental importance that participating states don't try to limit the independence of these civil society actors or instrumentalize them for political aims. Thank you.
Thank you. The United States of America is next.
Thank you very much, and I would like first to congratulate Madame Miotova for her very explicit report, and I would say that anyone who listened to it frankly should be shocked to hear that members of this organization are acting like syndicated crime organizations, frankly, with respect to journalists. Thomas Jefferson, one of our founders, said the freedom of the press was the most important freedom because it holds governments accountable. And if anyone does not appreciate the underlying philosophy of what Madame Miotova has been saying, if governments are not accountable to their people, they will fail. They cannot sustain this over time. So it's in your pragmatic interest to be concerned about this. There's a wonderful book written by a Turk and an American called Why Nations Fail. I recommend everyone at this table read this book because it goes back into thousands of years of history to show that governments who extract from the people rather than include the people in the governance process are going to fail ultimately and usually at the hands of violence. We, the United States, share interests with some of the countries that we will criticize here today. But we cannot pursue those interests if you continue to act toward your own people the way this report indicates. And so it's with sadness that we present facts as the ODIHR report you've just heard does. We cannot just come to this table and make allegations against other countries without absolutely assuring that what we're talking about are facts. It's not in our interest to try to throw allegations out that cannot be substantiated. We heard some of that yesterday from the Russian Federation. It's sad, as I said yesterday, to hear allegations that somehow we are conducting ourselves in the United States. There are plenty of things that can say that are factual about the United States, and we're as self-critical as anyone. But it is really unfortunate that after the Russian Federation put on a wonderful show for the world in the Winter Olympics at Sochi, that immediately after that show, dissidents were arrested. A journalist who was reporting on corruption within the Russian society was put under house arrest and not allowed to say what he had to say. I made statements yesterday about the Russian Federation. I eagerly went back to my hotel to watch Russian television to see if my statements were reported. Naturally, they were not. Didn't expect them to be. But some of the points that we make in our statement, which will be distributed, are really disturbing because basically what governments are doing in some cases are using thugs to intimidate journalists, to violently hurt them in some cases, to imprison them in other cases, to kill them in other cases. This is outrageous behavior on the part of governments, and it cannot be tolerated, should not be tolerated. We must not only make these reports available publicly, but we must take other actions to assure that they don't happen. There's a lot of information in my statement about the Russian Federation's activities. We have indications of the same types of things happening in Tajikistan, and I'm very, very disturbed about what has happened in Azerbaijan. And again, this report that Madame Miotova has put forward gives a lot of detail, as does my public statement. We sympathize especially with our ally, Turkey, for what it's going through now with respect to the refugees coming out of Syria. However, there have been several journalists that have been arrested in Turkey, and this is, again, an indication that there's insecurity on the part of the government. It's an important ally. We don't want Turkey to act in this way because we need them for many other reasons. In Kyrgyzstan, again, and this morning I had an opportunity to meet with some NGOs from Hungary. And there will be a side event today. I recommend that a lot of people go there because this is a member of the European Union. And yet this country is acting in such a way that will undercut its capacity, its very capacity to be a good and upstanding member of the European Union. And Kazakhstan is another example that we explain in our statement today that I hope all of you will read. I don't think there's any question in anyone's mind, or shouldn't be, that a government that is not accountable to its people cannot survive. So it's much more than simply the commitments that you violated to the OSCE. It's a matter of your sustainability as a viable government. Thank you.
Thank you. Austria is next on the list. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you, Dunya. We all must be alarmed. We must be alarmed by what we have heard, the increasing attacks on journalists, the ensuing shrinking space for independent discourse and information, including in digital media, and maybe most worryingly alarmed at the impunity for crimes committed against journalists, a lack of prosecution as well as a lack of prevention of these attacks. And this situation, as we have heard also this morning, all too often mirrors that of civil society at large, that these people being targeted because of their professional work. So we thank you for your work. We appreciate that the safety of journalists is not only a strong feature in your work, but also in that of other organizations as we pursue this in the UN. And the Office of the High Commissioner has issued a compilation of good practices, which would be a good tool for all of us also here. We would therefore add to the statement of the European Union, which of course we fully share, the following recommendations. Participating states to step up efforts to bring the perpetrators of crimes against journalists to justice, to step up preventive measures through cooperation with the representative on the freedom of the media, to facilitate the vibrant and diverse media landscape, online as well as offline, by creating a transparent and clear legal situation, as well as an overall climate in the society. And finally, to make full use of the voluntary reporting to the Human Dimension Committee in Vienna on these issues. I thank you.
Thank you. Czech Republic, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairperson. The Czech Republic aligns herself with the statement of the European Union. Given our historical experience, we have always been a strong advocate of respect for the freedom of expression, independent media, and free access of information. The Czech Republic would like to echo the concerns expressed in the EU statement on the deterioration of the respect of freedom of expression in some participating states. In particular, we are alarmed by the recent attacks in the Russian Federation on journalists reporting on the situation in eastern Ukraine. Furthermore, we were appalled by the cases of torture, killings, and disappearances of journalists in eastern Ukraine and continuing attempts to put pressure on the independent media in Crimea, as reported by the representative on freedom of media. We also note with particular concern the increasing trend of excessive regulation of the internet as a means of political repression, restriction of journalists and other media actors, as well as human rights defenders. We call on all participating states to respect the commitments made in the area of freedom of expression, to refrain from any further actions preventing the journalists to do their work, and to bring the perpetrators of criminal acts to justice. As a tangible expression of our priorities, we provided voluntary funds to the Open Journalism Project and other activities of the Representative on Freedom of the Media. Moreover, the Czech Republic prioritized the freedom of expression nationally within its transition promotion program. Currently, 14 practical projects are ongoing in the area of media in the total amount of 551,000 euro, almost 40% of which are allocated to support for independent media and access to information in Ukraine. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, in partnership with Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, further continued their support of talented journalists from Eastern Europe through Václav Havel Journalism Fellowships. For the first time this year, a new fellowship program inspired by Jiří Dinsby's work in the field of journalism, foreign policy and human rights was launched for a fellow from the Western Balkans. To conclude, we would like to thank the Representative on Freedom of the Media, Ms. Dunja Mijatović, for her work and reassure her of our continued support to her mandate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Russian Peace Foundation, please.
Спасибо, господин председательствующий. В информационной войне новый этап. На Украине спецбатальоны нерегулярной армии объявили охоту на российских журналистов. Истязания и убийства стали нормой. Российские журналисты для радикалов стали товаром. Для головорезов из ИГИЛ оранжевые одеяния, предназначенных к закланию журналистов, говорят об их особом статусе. Радикалы из Айдара это уже усвоили. Товар с каждым днем дорожает. В этом зале политизированная публика. Но превращение плененных российских журналистов в товар должно всех отрезвить. ИГИЛ уже сделал первый шаг в Европу. Это как вирус Эболы. Он не пощадит никого. Ситуация столь опасная, что охота на журналистов – это сафари на юго-востоке Украины. Надо приравнять к терроризму. В этом вопросе нет политических аспектов. Надо помочь Украине преодолеть варварский синдром по отношению к российским журналистам. Не потому, конечно, что могут последовать ответные меры. Это исключено. Но этот вирус Эболы даст эпидемию на самой Украине. Первые симптомы уже известны. Журналисты, помимо прочего, смазочное масло для диалога, а не живой товар для продажи, как заведено в украинских спецбатальонах ударной силы партии войны. Спасибо за внимание.
Спасибо. Freedom House, please. Freedom House.
Dear colleagues, freedom of expression across the OSCE region is under broad stress, with declines registered on Freedom House's Freedom in the Press survey across the OSCE. Freedom House calls attention to the ongoing attacks on freedom of expression by OSCE participating states during the past year, and especially the increasingly brazen and draconian steps taken to monitor and control information and expression on the Internet. Outright blockages of the Internet have unfortunately been frequent throughout the OSCE. In March, Turkey blocked Twitter and YouTube across the entire country in order to prevent circulation of what it considered to be damaging information about the government. The president of Turkey threatened to tear Twitter out by the roots. Turkey shares the distinction of blocking entire platforms with Tajikistan, which has repeatedly blocked YouTube and the social network VK, including in June of this year. New rules meant to intimidate outspoken and popular bloggers have been passed or introduced in several OSCE participating states. The new blogger law in Russia requires authors of popular blogs to register with the government and submit to additional requirements and restrictions in a clear effort to rein in Russia's vibrant blogosphere. Similar restrictions have been passed or under consideration in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. The taxes of censorship online continue their spread to the Internet before our eyes. It is imperative that efforts to better institutionalize protections for the fundamental freedoms online continue, and that OSCE participating states in the Ministerial Conference Permanent Council, HDIM, and indeed at all opportunities take concrete steps to protect human rights. We invite you to attend a side panel on media freedom and propaganda in the current Ukraine crisis today at 1 p.m. in meeting room 1, sponsored by several governments and civil society organizations. Thank you.
Thank you. Sweden, followed by the Russian Federation.
While aligning with the EU statement, let me in my national capacity take this opportunity to personally and on behalf of my government once again thank you, Dunja, and your team for your tireless efforts and in the service of freedom of the media and your integrity and courage. The right of every individual to freedom of expression lies at the very heart of the OSCE concept of comprehensive security. Without respect for this and other fundamental freedoms, there can be no security, no stability, neither for individual human beings nor for states. Since we met in this forum a year ago, the fear of the truth has increasingly become policy in some participating states. Those wanting to express their views freely are harassed, put into prison, tortured, threatened to death, or even killed. Internet is blocked, controlled, or otherwise managed. Media outlets are being forced to close. Self-censorship is often exercised as a consequence. To turn a blind eye to this is to condone the perpetrators. We see how information and propaganda warfare of an Orwellian scale has become a weapon accompanying the external military aggression against Ukraine. We also have seen that a free media and freedom of expression is the best way to fight and to resist lies and propaganda. This trend must be reversed. The fact that these principles and commitments are violated is not an argument for changing them or watering them down. It just underlines the need to uphold them firmly. And that is done also by pointing out when they have been violated. To help us uphold our common principle and commitments, we have collectively, all of us participating states, set up the autonomous institution of the Representative of Freedom of the Media. Sweden will resist any attempt to weaken this profoundly important institution. The tireless work of the representative and her staff to remind us of our commitments, express concern about our shortcomings, and assist us in finding solutions to our challenges is a cornerstone of the OSCE, contributing to our common vision of one security community based on shared values. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And particularly thank you for being the first delegation on time. Russian Federation to be followed by International Media Support Institute.
Дамы и господа, прежде всего хочу предложить почтить память погибших журналистов, осуществлявших свою профессиональную деятельность в конфликтных зонах, вставанием минуты молчания. Спасибо. Российская сторона неоднократно давала разъяснения по многим пунктам обвинений в отношении якобы ущемления свободы слова в нашей стране. На наш взгляд, краеугольная проблема ОБСЕ – это двойные стандарты. Совсем недавно тема необходимости регулирования интернета вызывала шквал негодования со стороны апологетов абсолютных свобод. Сейчас эмоции остыли, мало кто возражает, что и в виртуальной среде нужны четкие правила поведения для всех участников и государств, и гражданского общества, и медиасообщества. Однако любые российские законодательные инициативы в этой области априори вызывают отторжение и подвергаются обструкции без глубокого или хотя бы предварительного анализа ситуации. В это же время в образцовых демократиях, которые гордятся своими законами, применяются непропорционально жесткие меры наказания в отношении тех, кто позволил себе указать на их собственные недостатки. Как уже отмечала госпожа Миятович, подобные нарушения имеют место на всем пространстве ОБСЕ. В США одной из ведущих и наиболее авторитетных структур, осуществляющих надзор за соблюдением прав работников СМИ, является Комитет защиты прав журналистов. В электронной базе этой организации содержится более 150 публикаций с 2000 по 2014 годы, которые имеют отношение к нарушению прав журналистов в США. Больше всего материалов связано со случаями ненадлежащего обращения представителей властей США с журналистами. В августе 2014 года обеспокоенность организации вызвали задержание в городе Фергюсон, где происходили акции протеста в связи с убийством полицейскими Майкла Брауна, более 10 журналистов без предъявления обвинений. Несколько работников прессы также сообщили, что полицейские применили против них силу. Наиболее явственно двоякость стандартов ОБСЕ наблюдается применительно к украинскому кризису. И хочется обратить внимание выступавшего представителя Евросоюза, что преступления против журналистов, захват радиостанций происходит на территории Украины, а не России. А Россия еще в начале этого года обращала внимание госпожи Миятович на участившиеся случаи нарушений прав журналистов в этой стране. До поры до времени они расценивались структурами ОБСЕ как отдельные эпизоды, однако их количество заметно переросло в качество. Ограничительные меры в отношении СМИ стали системой запугивания журналистов обыденностью. Украина пошла по самому обычно критикуемому в рамках ОБСЕ пути запретов. На территории Украины запрещена ретрансляция 15 российских телеканалов. Представители МВД Украины и Надсовета по вопросам телевидения и радиовещания открыто заявляют о том, что этот список будет расширяться. Силовые структуры Украины последовательно лишают населения страны возможности получать альтернативную информацию. Систематически под надуманными поводами или без разъяснения причин с территории Украины выдворяются журналисты российских СМИ. А российские журналисты нередко подвергаются физическому воздействию. Многие наши журналисты погибли при исполнении своих профессиональных обязанностей на востоке Украины. Из-за позиции по украинскому кризису пострадали СМИ в ряде других государств. В апреле в Латвии на 3 месяца было приостановлено вещание российского телеканала РТР «Планета». По мнению полиции, сил безопасности Латвии и Национального совета по электронным СМИ Латвии, российские каналы угрожают национальной безопасности Латвии, раскалывая общество в вопросе интерпретации роли России в украинском кризисе. В Литве также было приостановлено на 3 месяца вещание ряда российских телеканалов. Подобная ситуация складывается и в Молдавии. По иронии судьбы, в прошлом году украинское председательство предложило выработать обновленный проект решения СМИ ОБСЕ по безопасности журналистов. Именно Киев настаивал на включении отдельным абзацем положения о подтверждении приверженности тех председательств, в том числе украинского, ранее взятым обязательством по защите журналистов. К сожалению, из-за серьезных и принципиальных разногласий по сути и тексту документа в прошлом году его не удалось согласовать. Однако позвольте выразить огромное сомнение, что даже если бы это решение было принято, ситуация с безопасностью журналистов в настоящий момент на территории Украины была бы иной. Погибли люди, профессиональные журналисты, как российские, так и журналисты европейских государств. И чтобы этого не произошло, было бы достаточно просто выполнять уже имеющиеся обязательства со стороны государств, участников ОБСЕ. Спасибо.
Спасибо. International Media Support Institute for Reporters' Freedom and Safety, to be followed by Switzerland.
Thank you. I will read out this statement on behalf of the Institute for Reporters' Freedom and Safety in Azerbaijan, whose leaders could not make it for this conference due to travel ban and other legal actions against them. Not a while ago, Azerbaijan was proudly hosting the general meeting of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. Back then, the Azerbaijani authorities said free expression is fully guaranteed in the country. After members of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly went home, the Azerbaijani government kicked off a frantic crackdown against human rights advocates, independent journalists, and their supporters. A number of media support organizations and their leaders are targeted in a criminal case. Among them are IREX, the Institute for Reporters' Freedom and Safety, and the International Media Support. All 3 work to promote media freedom in the country. On August 6, IRFS chairman, prominent human rights defender Emin Husseinov was prohibited from leaving the country. Contact with him has been broken off since August 8, when the IRFS offices were searched, assets and legal documents confiscated. Husseinov's mother's house was searched and her personal tablet seized. IRFS offices have been sealed by authorities. Activities have had to cease. On August 21st, Ilgar Nasibov, a journalist and human rights defender in Nakhchivan city of Azerbaijan, who has been critical of local regime and has written on several sensitive issues, was severely beaten. Following the attack, Ilgar Nasibov and his wife have been receiving phone calls threatening to kill their children if they continue their journalist work. Instead of bringing to justice those responsible for this brutal attack, the authorities charged Nasibov himself. Nasibov might join 9 reporters and 2 bloggers currently behind bars. There is no NGO or rights activist anymore in Azerbaijan to report on freedom of expression violations. We urge the member states to respond as quickly as possible to these unacceptable practices by a state that now holds the chairmanship of the Council of Europe's Committee of Ministers. The legal persecution of freedom of expression advocates and NGOs must be stopped before independent media are completely wiped out. Thank you.
Thank you. Switzerland to be followed by Article 19.
Merci, Monsieur le modérateur. Je tiens à remercier chaleureusement la représentante pour la liberté des médias, Dunia Mijatovic. La Suisse se réjouit de votre excellent travail et de l'objectivité, la transparence et le professionnalisme dont vous faites preuve pour mener à bien la mission que les États participants vous ont confiée. Votre travail engagé, courageux et constructif avec tous les États participants, à l'Est comme à l'Ouest de Vienne, a renforcé la crédibilité de l'institution et sa reconnaissance bien au-delà de la zone de l'OSCE. Les défenseurs des droits de l'homme et les journalistes jouent un rôle crucial dans toute société démocratique. Par la documentation, la sensibilisation et leur regard critique, ils rappellent aux États de remplir leurs obligations. Soutenir leur travail est le devoir de tout État et un investissement pour la primauté de l'État de droit et de la démocratie. De manière générale, le harcèlement, les arrestations, les détentions arbitraires ou les poursuites engagées contre les défenseurs des droits de l'homme et les journalistes sont une source d'inquiétude majeure pour la Suisse. Lors de sa présidence de l'OSCE, la Suisse a mis un accent particulier, à la fois sur la protection des défenseurs des droits de l'homme et les journalistes et sur la société civile. Nous avons lancé les lignes directrices sur les défenseurs des droits de l'homme du PIDDH lors de notre chairmanship conférence en juin à Berne. En plus, nous avons organisé 4 événements régionaux consacrés à la société civile. Une conférence parallèle de la société civile lors de la conférence ministérielle à Bâle est prévue. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Ambassador. Article 19 to be followed by Ukraine, please.
Distinguished Chair, participating states, colleagues. In 2014, OSCE participating states continued to fall short of its own human dimension commitments on free expression, as adopted nearly 20 years ago. These commitments continue to be undermined, including through the impunity for murder of journalists. Another area of concern is the use of politically motivated arrest of dissenting voices. Article 19 has documented several cases in the OSCE region where the political will to adequately address such impunity is absent. As an example, the murder of Ahmed Nabiev, a reporter for the internet portal Caucasian Knot, and the deputy director of independent newspaper Novoye Delo in Dagestan, Russian Federation. He actively reported on human rights violations against Muslims by the police and Russian army. The perpetrators and instigators behind Ahmed Nabiev's murder have yet to be found. However, the criminal investigation has been suspended. We call upon the Russian authorities to reopen the case at federal level and provide adequate resources for an independent and effective investigation in his and other cases. In Azerbaijan, it is now the norm, similar to the imprisonment of youth activists, social media activists, and human rights offenders, for journalists to be equally pressured and silenced through imprisonment on spurious charges. Currently, Azerbaijan has at least 10 journalists imprisoned on politically motivated charges. We call on the Azerbaijani authorities for their release. In Turkey, 29 Twitter users were on trial in Izmir and faced up to 3 years imprisonment for tweeting during the 2013 protests for posts that the authorities claim incite the public to break the law. None of the tweets contained any incitement to violence. Although yesterday exonerated, this is an example of pressure on independent voices that dissent. Article 19, as a member of the Civic Solidarity Platform, commends the work of the OSCE Representative on the freedom of the media and calls on the OSCE to reinforce its commitments to uphold the right to freedom of expression and right to information, including through the adoption of a broad decision at the upcoming Basel Ministerial Council in December 2014. Thank you.
Thank you. Article 19. Ukraine to be followed by Norway.
Dear friends, dear Ms. Mijatovic, let me say thank you for your great job and excellent presentation. And we are in Kyiv waiting for your visit next week in order to cooperate in making our homework on strengthening the freedoms in European Ukraine. Regarding concerns about the situation in Ukraine, I would like to point out that the role of freedom of expression and media pluralism as a human dimension is a cornerstone and crucially important in the development of democratic society. However, we should take into consideration that in time of crisis and anti-terrorism protection, certain rights can be limited by the law in the interest of the national security. In this respect, Ukrainian legislation is in line with the European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms, in particular to Part 2 of Article 10, Freedoms of Expression. It provides formalities, conditions, and restrictions or penalties that are necessary in the democratic society in the interest of national security, territorial integrity, and public safety, for the prevention of disorder of crime, for the protection of health or morals, for the protection of the reputation or rights of others. And the Constitution of Ukraine also provides some restriction by law in the interest of national security, territorial integrity, or public order for the purposes of preventing disturbance or crimes, protecting the health of the population, protecting the reputation or rights of other person. Look just on Article 34. The official monitoring conducted by the National Television and Radio Broadcasting Council of Ukraine on the daily basis confirms that the main characteristic features of the most informational and analytical programs of Russian channels are the incitement of ethnic hatred, propaganda of exclusivity and superiority, violation of human dignity and humiliation on the basis of the nationality and ideology. In this regard, in Ukraine, there have been taken all possible appropriate measures, courts and council's decision aimed at strengthening the informational security of the country regarding the incompliance of some Russian programs with the Ukrainian legislation, as well as with the European Convention on Transfrontier Television. Moreover, the counteraction against hate speech becomes the challenge not only for our country. It is necessary to develop the joint approach for providing clear balance between the freedom of speech and the protection of informational security. We believe that the public benefits will be greater than temporary prohibition on companies of rebroadcasting the Russian channels' programs in a manner that fundamentally harms society because of the content of news and other broadcasts. Some restriction on rights can be justified on the grounds of the public's right to security and stability of the state as such. It has to be admitted that we have launched the reform in the broadcasting sector aimed at establishing of public service broadcasting in the country. Thank you for your attention, dear friends.
Thank you. Let me once again call to the speakers to be strict on time, because otherwise we will not be able to finish discussion on time. No way to be followed by Serbia.
Moderator, I have 4 brief points. First, freedom of expression is a condition for the exercise of other human rights. Stable, democratic, and prosperous societies are inconceivable without it. It may be limited only in extreme cases. Second, free media and free journalists are cornerstones in our democracies. Governments must therefore not hinder journalists in keeping us informed. On the contrary, governments must ensure that they can do their job. They must ensure their safety in peacetime as in conflict. Third, it is imperative that we protect human rights online as we do offline. The right to express ourselves freely, petition our leaders, to associate freely with others, and worship according to our beliefs. These are all universal rights, and they must be protected both on and off the internet. We should fight against repressive policies used to restrict these human rights online. Fourth and final, we are concerned about mass surveillance practices which have a negative impact on the right to privacy, as well as on the work of journalists, lawyers, human rights defenders, and others. I encourage you to attend a side event on this topic today at lunchtime. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Serbia to be followed by Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Ambassador.
Thank you, Moderator. Due to the time constraint, I will mainly concentrate in my statement on new national laws on public information in media and electronic media, public service broadcasting, which recently adopted by our Assembly. Let me briefly mention some of the major changes introduced by these laws. The state shall no longer be the owner of media with the sole exemption of the public service broadcasting, abolishing publicly funded enterprises in the field of information, introducing the co-financing of media project as a form of state aid to the media, improving the quality of media content through the co-financing of media projects, introducing the media register to provide the transparency of the ownership in the field of media, providing the conditions for the competitive market without monopoly through the mechanism of protection of media pluralism, strengthening the position of the independent regulatory body for the electronic media, guaranteeing of programming as well as institutional and financial independence of public service broadcasters, enabling the conditions for switchover from analog to digital broadcasting, greater role of civil sector in the field of media, protection of journalists in exercising of their activities, and prohibition of hate speech. We are convinced that these media laws are contributing to the strengthening of the freedom of media and expression. We appreciate the readiness of the representative of freedom of media to observe and assist us in implementing these sets of law and media. Before concluding, let me reiterate our full respect for relevant international standards, undertaking OSCE commitments, and guaranteeing full freedom of the media. I would like to underline some concrete steps which our government undertook in regard to the protection of journalists, in particular the establishment of the State Commission tasked to elucidating unsolved cases of murdered journalists. As far as the attack on the editor of the Phonic News Agency, I would just recall that our government strongly condemned this attack. Minister of Interior Stefanovic ordered a swift investigation, and government is very much committed to bring perpetrators to the justice. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Ambassador. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty to be followed by Russia Today.
I'm one of harassed journalists of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which is banned on local frequencies in Azerbaijan, but I'm here not to speak about Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and on behalf of them. I'm here to speak on behalf of 14 journalists and bloggers who are in the list of political prisoners in Azerbaijan. I was part of the working group that compiled that list, and two main authors of the list are now in prison. Leyla Yunus and Rasul Jafarov, human rights activists who compiled the list of political prisoners in Azerbaijan, which includes 98 names, 98 political prisoners, who wrote about 98 political prisoners and the tortures they faced. They are now in prison, and 58 years old human rights activist Leyla Yunus is facing tortures herself now. And she was defending the rights of Novruzali Mammadov, who died in prison because of ill treatment, and now she herself is facing ill treatment in Azerbaijan. And it's because of impunity. Those who killed and ordered assassination of Elmar Huseynov, investigative journalist Elmar Huseynov in 2005, are still in large. Those who ill-treated Novruzali Mammadov in prison to death are still in large. Those who are imprisoning journalists and bloggers in Azerbaijan are not being punished and are not being criticized enough by international organizations. And I regret that the voice of Dunya Mijatovic is basically the sole voice on behalf of journalists in Azerbaijan. And we wish Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and other organizations, other bodies of OSCE, and ambassador of OSCE to Azerbaijan to join their voices on behalf of those who are silenced in Azerbaijan. Basically, the list of political prisoners includes civil society leaders, election monitors, human rights activists, politicians, almost everyone who could oppose the Azerbaijani government's commitment to Putinist Russia policies. This is the Putinist Russia's policies to silence critiques and to silence NGOs who have foreign funding and to silence every single journalist who are telling the truth. This is the Putinist Russia's example Azerbaijani government and some other dictatorships in the region are following. And those who could oppose those policies are now being put in jail because Azerbaijani government doesn't want things happened in Ukraine, I mean Euromaidan, to gather in Azerbaijan. But this
Please conclude.
And conclusion is that Azerbaijani delegation will probably tell you that internet is free, and since I'm here alive and speaking out, then everything is okay in Azerbaijan. Well, I want to thank them for not killing me yet, but I also want to cite the fact that internet is controlled by the government of Azerbaijan. The president's daughters own 70% of the mobile communication and one of two backbone internet providers. And bloggers, yes, you can write in internet what you think, but you will be arrested for that. More than that.
Please conclude.
More than that, there is the list of political prisoners include the section hostages. It's not only you who is being targeted. Your relatives can be arrested to put pressure on you, as it happened to Murad Adilev, the co-host of the Azerbaijani Hour satellite show, and Faraj Karimli's brother, who is the admin of the 300,000 like page. So this is what is happening in Azerbaijan, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Russia Today, to be followed by Western Thrace Minority University Graduates Association. Russia Today. All right. Western Thrace Minority University Graduates Association, to be followed by United Kingdom, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Aysel Homko, and I'm representing Western Thrace Minority University Graduates Association. I would like to give some examples of Greek violation of freedom of expression very briefly. My country, Greece, violates human and minority rights with her legislations. The media law endangers basic concepts of pluralism, diversity and minority rights by limiting the usage of the Turkish language in Western Thrace. The authorities also prevent minority people from delivering their speeches in Turkish in conferences. The 240 Imam law and the issue of appointed muftis are against the spirit of democracy and human rights. The Greek authorities still continue to violate the right to freedom of expression of the Turkish minority. Therefore, Mr. Moderator, recalling that the freedom of expression is considered as one of the basic human rights, reaffirming the OSCE's sensitivity on the issue, Western Thrace Minority University Graduates Association would like to highlight the necessity of democratic pluralism and cultural diversity for the development of global societies. In this context, we would like to recommend Greece to respect the right to freedom of expression of all segments of the society, especially of the Turkish minority, to respect and to implement the provisions of international standards that she is a party. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's United Kingdom followed by the Netherlands.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I fully subscribe to the statement made by Sweden on behalf of the European Union, which I'd like to reinforce with some national remarks, which I will shorten to save time. It is disturbing to hear the negative trends described by Representative Mijatovic here today and throughout the year by her office's timely interventions to highlight violations of OSCE commitments. We are concerned about harassment, intimidation and assassination of journalists and strongly condemn such attacks. There have been many inconclusive debates amongst OSCE participating states over precisely who should be protected when we speak of tackling the prevailing climate of attacks against journalists. Our own position on this is clear and simple. Anyone exercising their freedom of expression should be protected from the sickening violence and intimidation that we are increasingly seeing across the OSCE space. The context should not matter. We should not seek to differentiate between those expressing views nor the means which they are using to communicate them, whether it be those bravely reporting from conflict zones, online bloggers commenting on corruption allegations, or opposition activists criticising their government through social media. All deserve the protection provided for by international law. We call on OSCE participating states to acknowledge that human rights, including the freedom of expression, apply with equal force online as they do in the offline world. I'd like to place on record that my government holds the work of Representative Mijatovic and her team in the very highest professional regard. They are an outstanding example of international advocacy, not least in their diligence in holding all participating states to account, including the UK. It is proper, fair, and indeed an essential requirement of her mandate that she should continue to do so. A brief mention, if I may, about the role of independent civil society. NGOs, we welcome your active participation at HDIM. Your input enriches the meeting and contributes to our efforts to make the work of the OSCE more relevant to our own societies and more relevant to our citizens, whose interests we should ultimately serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Netherlands, to be followed by Alliance of Youth Institutions of Kazakhstan.
Thank you, Chairman. We fully support the work of the representative for the freedom of media, and we welcome her statement made earlier. It also shows that we still have a long way to go, and all of us, and some a longer way than others. I fully subscribe, of course, by the recommendations made by the EU, or by Sweden on behalf of the EU. And I welcome also the silence, say, asked for by Russia on those journalists killed in conflict. However, it is not limited to conflict. Journalists are killed also outside conflict in their own country, as also lined out by the NGO Article 19, and there still has a lot to be done. And also in Azerbaijan, where journalists are still threatened and intimidated. And for us, freedom of expression and space for those who express their opinion is essential. It contributes to diversity, and diversity in a society contributes to stability and security. Because you could kill those who have a different opinion, and you could reach a stability for the short term, but for the longer term it creates instability, and that is what we in the OSCE are not aiming for. Though intimidation is not limited to the conventional media, it's also on internet. And we think that internet right now is an important media, because with more internet, people can have also access to more diversity. And therefore, we fully condemn restrictions and blockages on the internet as such. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Alliance of Youth Initiatives of Kazakhstan, to be followed by Salutant Mezerkorde.
Благодарю организаторов за предоставленную возможность донести до широкой общественности плачевное состояние свободы слова в Казахстане. Я сегодня представляю здесь фонд «Открытый диалог», но еще недавно я работала в казахстанской газете «Голос Республики». В той самой газете, которая была закрыта прокуратурой и судом за то, что писала правду о событиях в Жанаозене. Напомню, что тогда была закрыта не только «Голос Республики». Казахстанские власти придумали новый бренд для казахстанского медиарынка – «Единая СМИ Республика». И теперь подводят под этот бренд все неугодные им СМИ. В 2012 году под этим брендом были закрыты 7 газет и 20 интернет-ресурсов. В этом году история с решением суда о едином СМИ «Республика» получила продолжение. Суд, опять же по заявлению прокурора, признала газету «Асанди Таймс» формой распространения единого СМИ «Республика» и запретила ее издавать. Решение суда по газете «Асанди Таймс» вступило в законную силу 12 июня 2014 года. Основания для закрытия были такие. Несколько лет назад в этой газете были перепечатаны статьи из газеты «Голос Республики». И авторами некоторых статей являлись журналисты, которые ранее публиковались в газете «Голос Республики». То есть, по сути, казахстанские суды создали новую практику, при которой любые два или несколько СМИ можно признать едиными СМИ и закрыть. Если, к примеру, в одной из газет перепечатана статья с другой газеты, мировая практика работы журналистов в Казахстане также поставлена вне закона. Фактически решением суда установлен запрет журналисту работать на несколько СМИ, в том числе интернет-сайты. Хочу обратить внимание, что судебный процесс сопровождался обысками, незаконными изъятиями газет, оборудования, компьютеров, документов. Несмотря на то, что журналисты обращались с жалобами на незаконные действия судебных исполнителей, полицейских, ничего не изменилось, никаких мер не принято, виновные не наказаны, документы и оборудование не возвращены. Все это возможно в Казахстане по той причине, что последние 10-15 лет идет планомерное ужесточение контроля за работой журналистов в законодательном порядке. Практически ежегодно в действующие законы вносят изменения и дополнения, которые усложняют работу журналистов. Приведу такой пример. Журналистское сообщество Казахстана уже не одно десятилетие безуспешно пытается добиться декриминализации клеветы и оскорбления. На площадке ОБСЕ об этом уже не раз говорилось. Вместо этого в апреле этого года в Уголовный кодекс внесены ряд статей, усиливающих уголовную ответственность. И под удар попадают в первую очередь журналисты. Например, в одной из новых статей предусмотрена уголовная ответственность за распространение недостоверной информации. Причем под понятие информации подпадают абсолютно все ее виды. Это и мнения, предположения, то есть аналитическим материалам тоже пришел конец в Казахстане. Во-вторых, в этой статье ответственность предусмотрена за возможный вред. Со времен римского права ответственность наступает за нанесенный вред, но в нашей стране законодатели продемонстрировали новаторство, установив, что возможно привлечь к уголовной ответственности за распространение недостоверной информации, которая может привести к причинению вреда физическим или юридическим лицам.
Пожалуйста,
в общем, судя по той
заканчивайте.
тенденции, которую мы наблюдаем, впереди журналистов ждут еще другие сюрпризы от наших законодательств. Более подробная информация о преследовании журналистов и независимых СМИ в Казахстане изложена в докладе Фонда «Открытый диалог». Желающие могут обратиться, и мы сделаем рассылку, а также их можно найти в раздаточных материалах. Спасибо большое.
Спасибо. Saluted Mr. Korde, to be followed by Norwegian Helsinki Committee.
Mon intervention entend dénoncer la condamnation de l'islamophobie comme entrave à la liberté d'expression. En France même, cet été, la justice a condamné Christine Tazin pour avoir exprimé son opinion au sujet de l'islam. Le délit d'islamophobie impose de confesser l'islam hors de toute critique possible. Mais pour qui d'autre que pour un musulman, l'islam est-il hors de toute critique possible ? Sommes-nous tous devenus musulmans ? La liberté d'expression implique de pouvoir dire ce qui ne plaît pas nécessairement à autrui et même à être provoquant, y compris à l'égard des musulmans, qui ne sont pas une race supérieure, comme Allah le leur fait croire, sourate 3, verset 110. Si la limite à la liberté d'expression est l'appel à la violence à l'égard d'autrui, pourquoi les nobles défenseurs de la liberté d'expression condamnent-ils l'islamophobie et ne condamnent-ils pas la diffusion du Coran, dont tant de versets expriment la noire intention de combattre à mort les non-musulmans pour les humilier ou les anéantir? L'Occident laïque aurait-il donc finalement décidé de se soumettre à Allah qui commande « Combattez les mécréants jusqu'à ce qu'il n'y ait plus d'occasion d'être autre chose que musulmans » Coran, sourate 2, verset 193. Dans ce cas, notre réunion est-elle autre chose qu'une sinistre farce? Mais comment l'Europe, ayant renié ses racines chrétiennes, pourrait-elle connaître notre destin? Qui n'est pas avec moi est contre moi, disait le Christ. Les responsables politiques ne devraient donc pas se laisser impressionner lorsque l'islam crie au blasphème pour avoir été critiqué, mais ils devraient défendre d'autant plus fort la liberté d'expression qu'elle est menacée et en conséquence prendre toutes les mesures nécessaires pour neutraliser à tout jamais la promotion du délit d'islamophobie. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Norwegian Helsinki Committee, to be followed by Mongolian Independent Trade Union, Aktau.
Thank you.
In 2014, a large number of people in Europe are jailed for no other reason than for disagreeing with their government. In Azerbaijan, a wave of repression against human rights defenders, independent journalists, youth protesters, election observers, opposition leaders, and Muslim believers is taking place, with many receiving long jail terms. In the beginning of August this year, a list of 98 political prisoners was presented, a list developed by Azerbaijani civil society because the Council of Europe, Parliamentary Assembly, and other international institutions had failed to do so. Several of those central in the work, including Leyla Yunus, Intigam Aliyev, and Rasul Yafarov, have now been arrested. Their names have become the last three on the list they themselves helped to compile. Others are subjected to harassment, threats, and some are forced to seek a life in exile. Many of those jailed over the last year are familiar faces to this very audience. The OSCE and its participating states must now step up to stop this irresponsible and unacceptable practice in OSCE member states. The OSCE bodies and participating states should organize a high-level special session on the existence of political prisoners in Europe, inviting human rights defenders from countries where political prisoners exist to establish the facts and to develop a decisive plan of action for a speedy resolve of the problem, attend the trials where human rights defenders, journalists, or activists are being charged on spurious grounds because of their professional activities, and swiftly publish the reports on the observations, establish emergency procedure to ensure their personal safety on short and long term by issuing multi-entry visas free of charge for the activists and their closest family, establish flexible possibilities for the persons at risk to find temporary safe havens by establishing scholarships for work or study in other OSCE participating states. The Norwegian Helsinki Committee has already written a letter to our Foreign Minister Børge Brende asking the Norwegian government to secure such measures. Thank you.
Thank you. Mangistan Independent Trade Union Aktau, I apologize for mispronouncing. It will be followed by Russian Public Institute of Electoral Law.
Благодарю. Я являюсь представителем Казахстана. Это Мангистауская область, независимый профсоюз, там, где находится известный ныне во всем мире город Жанаузен после трагических событий. Время ограничено, я хотел бы сказать по существу. В Казахстане после этих трагических событий власть решила на корню удавить рабочее движение независимого профсоюза Казахстана. Совсем недавно в Казахстане был принят закон новый о профсоюзах, который фактически ставит крест на деятельности независимых профсоюзов. И фактически устанавливается монополия одной профсоюзной организации, это Федерация профсоюза Казахстана, которая контролирует правительство республики, во главе которой недавно поставлен чиновник господин Кусаинов. Вместе с новым законом...
Я прошу выступать по теме заседания, если можно.
Хорошо. Вместе с новым законом о профсоюзах приняты поправки в новый уголовный административный кодекс Республики Казахстан, по которому вообще криминализируется любая общественно-политическая деятельность граждан Казахстана. К примеру, за участие в незаконных собраниях, митингах, забастовках установлена уголовная ответственность.
Простите, вам придется подождать и выступить на соответствующем заседании.
Okay.
Russian Public Institute of Electoral Law, to be followed by NGO Sandijan.
Спасибо. В России это уникальный случай на пространстве ОБСЕ в целях оказания содействия главе государства в реализации конституционных полномочий в области обеспечения прав и свобод человека и гражданина действует Совет при президенте Российской Федерации по развитию гражданского общества и правам человека, куда вошли практически все ведущие правозащитники России. Только за последнее время по инициативе и с участием Совета были реализованы важные проекты, имевшие позитивный резонанс в обществе. В связи с участившимися случаями воспрепятствования профессиональной деятельности журналистов на территории Украины, нападений и даже смерти журналистов, по инициативе Совета был внесен законопроект о дополнительных мерах по обеспечению гарантий профессиональной деятельности журналистов. Совет сильно обеспокоен событиями в соседней Украине. Число жертв внутреннего военного конфликта исчисляется тысячами. Отдельные члены Совета, рискуя собственной жизнью, пытаются оказать помощь жителям Украины, спасти детей, немощных, стариков. брошенные на произвол судьбы жители Украины, пытаются найти спасение в России, и таких уже 1 миллион. Вызывает озабоченность у Совета, что только одно государство сегодня фактически оказывает содействие и помощь гражданам Украины, принимая беженцев у себя.
Прошу выступать по теме заседания.
Да, Советом также реализован ряд проектов, направленных как раз на расширение прав и свобод журналистов, и они хорошо известны, полный текст будет дан. Но у нас есть и проблемы. Письма и обращения председателя Совета ОБСЕ полностью игнорируются. В том числе это мы обращались непосредственно к генеральному секретарю ОБСЕ Ламберту Занеру, оказать международное содействие в реализации прав и свобод, в том числе журналистов на территории Украины, но по сообщению, опять же, аппарата ОБСЕ, это письмо было потеряно. Другие призывы также не находят ответа. Сегодня, к сожалению, мы не видим опоры надежных партнеров, союзников в лице ОБСЕ, чьи служащие решают вопросы, исходя из политической целесообразности, а не в интересах защиты прав и верховенства закона. Надеемся, что это временная зависимость от доноров, которая трудно, но излечима. Спасибо за внимание.
Спасибо. NGO Сандиджан, to be followed by France.
Добрый день, дамы и господа. Благодарю за предоставленное слово. Я представляю общественность Южной Осетии. Долгие годы средства массовой информации республики работали в условиях национально-освободительной борьбы, и это наносило несомненный отпечаток на формат их деятельности. Работа в условиях информационной войны не шла на пользу свободе слова. Подавляющее большинство информации было посвящено соседней Грузии. Важную роль играл фактор невынесения ссоры из дома. То есть внутренние проблемы республики сознательно не озвучивались журналистами, дабы не формировать отрицательный имидж страны, которая боролась за международное признание и свою независимость. После 2008 года ситуация изменилась кардинально. Юго-остинские СМИ переключились на внутренние проблемы и уже практически не пишут о соседней Грузии. Кстати, то же самое можно сказать и о самой Грузии. Тема Абхазии и Южной Осетии уже не занимает столько места в информационном пространстве этой страны, как раньше. Являясь руководителем одного из независимых юго-остинских изданий, интернет-изданий, мне приходится с сожалением констатировать практически полное отсутствие в республике оппозиционных традиционных СМИ. Говорить о функционировании независимого радио или телевидения вообще не приходится. Такая ситуация сложилась по простой причине – это отсутствие денег, отсутствие финансирования. В связи с этим я бы хотел озвучить предложение, которое может показаться очень наивным, скажу банальность, но оппозиция является важной и неотъемлемой частью функционирования любого правового государства. Во многих странах зоны ОБСЕ функционируют государственные СМИ, и было бы прекрасно, если бы функционирование оппозиционных СМИ стало бы таким же обязательным явлением, как и функционирование СМИ негосударственных. Я, конечно же, имею в виду их обязательное государственное финансирование. Ну, редакционную политику подобных СМИ определяли бы представители крупнейшей оппозиционной силы страны. Кстати, это в интересах и самих правящих партий, потому что любая правящая партия когда-то сможет стать оппозиционной.
Пожалуйста, заканчивайте.
Да, спасибо большое. Мы передадим все свои предложения в рассылочный материал.
Спасибо вам. France, to be followed by Lithuania.
Merci. Tout en m'associant à la déclaration de l'Union européenne, je souhaite plus particulièrement évoquer la question de la protection des journalistes, dont la France estime qu'elle est insuffisamment traitée à l'OSCE, malgré les nombreux engagements pris en faveur de la liberté des médias et de la liberté d'expression. La protection des journalistes, hors ligne comme en ligne, passe tout d'abord par l'établissement d'un cadre législatif favorable à la liberté d'expression et conforme au droit international. De ce principe découle la liberté de la presse, qui est une composante fondamentale de la liberté d'expression. Dans cet environnement législatif, le principe de la protection des sources doit être pleinement pris en compte et mieux appliqué dans l'espace OSCE. En France, il a été intégré dans la loi sur la liberté de la presse le 5 janvier 2010, qui dispose qu'un journaliste ne peut pas être mis en demeure de révéler ses sources, ce qui constitue une garantie de son indépendance et de la poursuite de son travail en toute impartialité. Le législateur français examine actuellement un nouveau projet de loi visant à renforcer encore ce principe de confidentialité des sources. La protection des journalistes implique aussi qu'on prévienne les actes de violence, qu'il s'agisse des pratiques d'intimidation, de harcèlement ou bien des agressions physiques, mais aussi qu'on ne laisse pas ces actes impunis lorsqu'ils se produisent. Suite à une initiative franco-grecque, en partenariat avec Reporters sans frontières, le Conseil de sécurité des Nations Unies a adopté à l'unanimité la résolution 1738 en 2006 sur la protection des journalistes dans les conflits armés. Les engagements des États participants pour la protection des journalistes ne se limitent pas aux conflits armés. Les obligations internationales en matière de protection de la liberté d'expression et de la liberté de la presse s'appliquent quel que soit le contexte. C'est dans cet esprit que l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies a adopté à l'unanimité le 26 novembre 2013 une résolution sur la protection des journalistes et la lutte contre l'impunité qui appelle les États à prévenir les violences exercées contre les journalistes dans le respect de leur indépendance et à lutter contre l'impunité de leurs auteurs. Comme le soulignait notre ministre des Affaires étrangères Laurent Fabius, lorsqu'on commet un crime contre un journaliste, on commet un double crime contre un homme et contre la liberté fondamentale d'informer et d'être informé. Ces crimes ne doivent pas rester impunis, y compris dans l'espace OSCE. Nous appelons les États participants à faire en sorte que l'OSCE soit à la hauteur des standards onusiens en matière de protection des journalistes.
Thank you. Lithuania, to be followed by Russian State TV channel Zvezda.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Vincentas Svobodavičius. I represent Lithuanian Radio and Television Commission. I also teach political economy at ISM University of Management and Economics in Vilnius. Since the venerable tradition of Alexis de Tocqueville, it was clear that civil society represents a bulwark against tyranny of government, and free media is an important tool in the hands of civil society in exposing and limiting excesses of government. It is our opinion, however, that state-owned and state-controlled sources of information do not necessarily merit the same kind of protection and the same kind of leeway that truly free and independent media controlled by the civil society does. State-owned media that is prevalent in Lithuania's neighbors, most particularly Russia and Belarus, happens to be incapable of criticizing the government and therefore representing a bulwark against government excesses. This situation becomes particularly difficult during presence of military conflicts, as the one we currently see in the east of Ukraine. In this particular case, the sources of information that are controlled by the government become participants alongside with combatants in a military conflict. Instead of reflecting the truth, they actually reflect one side and inflict damage. For example, there was an instance by a Russian state-controlled media reporting of a child being crucified in eastern Ukraine, clearly a fabricated story that nevertheless had liability to provoke hostility, to provoke hatred, to provoke war propaganda. Therefore, we believe that it is important to consider just and fair limitations against the media sources that have become tools of government propaganda rather than government control. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Russian State TV channel Zvezda, to be followed by Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Russian Federation.
Меня зовут Евгений Давыдов, я из России, репортер телеканала «Звезда». Я провел больше месяца на Украине, в Славянске и Краматорске, когда эти города подвергались массированным обстрелам со стороны украинских силовиков, работал в Донецке и в других населенных пунктах Донбасса. После снимал репортажи уже по другую сторону границы, у контрольно-пропускных пунктов Изварина и Гуково. Вот, думаю, вы видели здесь у входа выставка фотографий моего коллеги Андрея Стенина. Мы с ним виделись многократно, вместе работали. И вот в его фотографиях, несмотря на то, что Андрей, к сожалению, уже мертв, живое свидетельство всех ужасов войны. Мы сидели в подвалах, слышали, как взрываются снаряды, как работает тяжелая техника по жилым кварталам и гадали, куда же упадет снаряд в этот раз. И вот теперь меня, как и Андрея, как и многих других наших коллег на Украине называют террористами. И вот, простите, но вот в своих репортажах я рассказывал о том, как страдают от войны мирные жители. Я прекрасно видел, кто стреляет, откуда стреляет и по кому стреляет. И хотел бы спросить, вот кто из вас, друзья, был на Украине в последние месяцы в зоне так называемой антитеррористической операции? Вы на самом деле видели, что там происходит? И сомневаюсь. Скажу, что я был по обе стороны конфликта. Несколько дней провел в плену боевиков правого сектора. Это такие украинские националисты. Вот у меня беременная жена и маленький ребенок. Им говорили, что пришлют меня по частям и требовали выкупа в $200 тысяч. И за что, я не знаю, за то, что я рассказывал о том, как 80-летняя бабушка, которая пережила в свое время фашистов, сейчас страдает от бомбежек страны украинской армии и негде жить. Рассказывал о том, как 8-месячный младенец, мальчик Женя, остался в разбитой больнице в окруженном Славянске под аппаратом искусственного дыхания. И вот меня считают террористом только за то, что я рассказывал о том, что неудобно слышать властям в Киеве и, не знаю, за то, что у меня российский паспорт. Ну, добавлю, что после возвращения домой я несколько дней провел в госпитале, и это на самом деле не пропаганда, это жизнь, наверное. Спасибо.
Спасибо. Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights in the Russian Federation, to be followed by delegation of Turkmenistan.
Уважаемые дамы и господа, Институт уполномоченного по правам человека в России в силу своих компетенций следит за нарушением прав журналистов как на территории России и с марта мониторит ситуацию за наблюдением за нарушением прав журналистов на Украине. К сожалению, в нашем списке нарушений гораздо больше случаев, на которые стоит обратить внимание, чем представила госпожа Миятович. Наш список мы распространяем на сессии ОБСЕ. И хотелось бы обратить внимание, что если в марте нарушения в основном были связаны с недопущением журналистов на территорию Украины или не предоставлением им информации, то в последние месяцы это в основном случаи пропажи журналистов и, к сожалению, их гибели. Хотелось бы надеяться, что при совместной деятельности с ОБСЕ и также при действии международных наблюдателей случаи как пропажи как российских журналистов, так и, соответственно, журналистов всех стран прекратятся. И хотелось бы все стороны, которые ответственны за этот конфликт, взяли ответственность на себя за погибших журналистов и остановили эти действия. Спасибо.
Thank you. Turkmenistan to be followed by OSCE Parliamentary Assembly.
Спасибо, господин председатель, дамы и господа. Я Ханамов, председатель Республиканской партии Туркменистана в изгнании. В отношении СМИ в Туркменистане, свободы СМИ я имею в виду, можно сказать без комментариев, потому что свобода СМИ в Туркменистане отсутствует. Об этом говорили неоднократно в прежние годы на этих заседаниях, а в прошлом году я подтвердил, что могло бы быть альтернативой для свободного СМИ. Это радиостанция Туркменская служба Азатлык, радиостанция «Свобода». Но подчеркнул, что с приходом, вернее, с назначением нового руководства Мухаммеда Тахира, эта служба не превратилась в альтернативу, а наоборот, она стала как бы одним из служб туркменского СМИ. Я привел ряд примеров, почему к этому приведет. Но, к сожалению, в этом зале не был услышан. Поэтому хочу подчеркнуть, что в этом году ситуация стала еще хуже. Сейчас это свелось до того, что всего-навсего все передачи укладываются в 30 минут. И оно потом просто повторяется в течение 4 часов. Более конкретные, в чем заключается, что ухудшилось, я повторю, сегодня эта служба потеряла авторитет и слушателей своих в Туркменистане.
Пожалуйста, заканчивайте.
Хорошо, заканчиваю. И поэтому я хотел бы еще раз призвать официальный представитель Соединенных Штатов, ОБСЕ, и тут я слышал, что присутствуют представители радиостанции «Свобода», и с ними я готов встретиться и объяснить, в чем причина и как улучшить. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you. To make it clear, the gentleman didn't speak on behalf of the delegation of Turkmenistan. It's apparently a mistake in the list. I give the floor to the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, Grand National Assembly of Turkey, to be followed by Council of Europe.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, as Vice Chair of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly's Committee on Democracy, Human Rights and Humanitarian Questions, it's a pleasure to be with you here today. Just under a year ago, I addressed the Human Dimension Committee in Vienna to express the PA's support for the draft decision on protection of journalists in the OSCE region. I noted then that the OSCE PA has adopted several recent resolutions pertaining to freedom of expression during the annual sessions, including 2013's resolution on freedom of media, notably passed without a single dissenting vote. It was particularly disappointing then that the participating states were unable to reach a consensus on this draft decision, during last year's Ministerial Council. As recent events across the OSCE region illustrate, the issue remains no less topical. As part of a broader diminishing of democratic space, we have witnessed journalists being increasingly subjected to intimidation, imprisonment, and violence. These actions have frequently been rationalized in the name of security or as a means to combat foreign influence. Such behavior is entirely without merit. In times of tension, it is especially vital that we abide by our commitments and principles. If we cannot do so when it is most difficult, we undermine their foundation and open the door to their arbitrary application, a slippery slope toward the persecution of minority opinions and ideas. History has demonstrated that this path, once pursued, is immensely difficult to return from. This lesson is equally applicable to my home country of Turkey, whose experience with these issues contains many lessons for others within the OSCE. Attempting to stifle opposition voices is not a recipe for democratic development. On the contrary, it fosters mistrust and disaffectedness while damaging the citizenry faith in their institutions. It is therefore important for the governmental side to bear in mind the total cost exacted when enacting or tacitly endorsing these regressive and anti-democratic policies. Another example of flagrant violation of freedom of speech and persecution of journalists, bloggers, is the treatment by Ukrainian authorities. It is especially of paramount importance that the governments pay even more attention to the right of freedom of speech in conflict zones. If we want to see the end of violence in Ukraine, the guarantee of freedom of speech is the important component of such peace efforts. It is in this context that I appeal for the immediate end of all such practices. Participating states must take a firm commitment to prevent the erosion of media freedom and the culture of impunity that has led to journalists being threatened, abducted, or killed. Furthermore, I urgently call for the release without delay of all journalists who have been imprisoned for having done nothing more than carry out their profession. It is my hope that the protection of journalists and media freedom is again on the agenda of the Ministerial Council. The OSCE Parliamentary Assembly's many resolutions on subject could serve as a departure point for the dialogue. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Council of Europe to be followed by Baltic Center of Historical and Social Political Research.
Mr. Moderator, let me present the overview of the work of the Council of Europe in the media and information society field. The Council of Europe activities in the media and information society aim at promoting freedom of expression and information as guaranteed by Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, as well as the free flow of information. Council of Europe Conference of Ministers responsible for media and information society, which took place in Belgrade in 2013, provided an impetus for the Council of Europe policy development through adopting the following text: Political Declaration, Freedom of Expression and Democracy in Digital Age, Resolution on Internet Freedom, Resolution preserving the essential role of media in the digital age, as well as safety of journalists. In addition, important instruments have been adopted, including recommendation on gender equality and media. Moreover, the recommendation, which I would like to pay your attention, of the Committee of Ministers to Member States on a guide to human rights for Internet users was adopted in 2013. Well, on June 2013, the Committee of Ministers adopted the declaration on risk to fundamental rights stemming from digital tracking and other surveillance technologies. If you are talking about a promotion of the Article 10 of the European Convention, I would like to pay your attention to the declaration of the Council of Europe Secretary General and establishment of task force on freedom of expression and media.
Please conclude.
Well, I would like to say that to achieve certain results won't be possible without the cooperation with the OSCE. The OSCE actively participated in many conferences, and I would like also to express our gratitude to Ms. Dunia Mijatovic. The whole text you will find online, and let me also invite you for the site event on 29th of September on combating hate speech online. Thank you.
Thank you. Baltic Center of Historical and Social Political Research, to be followed by International Foundation for the Protection of Freedom of Speech, Adil Sos.
Уважаемые господа, хочу обратить ваше внимание на то, что латвийское государство в последний период существенно ухудшило выполнение своих обязательств по человеческому измерению в части свободы слова и свободы перемещения. Как уже отмечалось, в Латвии и в Литве на трехмесячный срок была приостановлена трансляция некоторых российских телеканалов. Ограничение свободы слова нашло свое выражение также в принятых парламентом Латвийской Республики поправках к уголовному закону, которые предусматривают наказание за отрицание преступлений СССР против народа Латвии. Наиболее активные в защите прав соотечественников общественной организации Латвии упомянуты как враждебные в официальных отчетах латвийских спецслужб. Нашу серьезную озабоченность вызывает также курс официальной Риги на ограничение контактов с соотечественниками в России, что выразилось в составлении некоего черного списка, куда включены лица, которым закрыт въезд в Латвию якобы по соображениям национальной безопасности. В этот список включены известные историки и правозащитники, в частности, директор фонда «Историческая память», историк Александр Дюков и его коллега Владимир Семендей, директор фонда поддержки и защиты прав соотечественников Игорь Паневкин и старший эксперт этого фонда Владимир Поздоровкин, а также популярные эстрадные российские исполнители Иосиф Кобзон, Олег Газманов и Валерия. Хочу еще раз подчеркнуть, что для достижения своей цели построения латышской Латвии, власти Латвии сегодня ведут активное наступление на права человека, включая права на свободу слова и свободу перемещения. Спасибо.
Thank you. Adil Sos, to be followed by Media Law Institute.
Добрый день, меня зовут Жанна Байтела. Я хотела бы сказать, что с начала этого года Казахстан значительно ужесточил законодательство в сфере прав на свободу слова. Об этом подробно чуть позже расскажет моя коллега. Я же, наверное, остановлюсь о фактах нападений на журналистов. С начала этого года их было совершено 5, и обстоятельства всех инцидентов позволяют квалифицировать их как крайнюю форму воспрепятствования работе журналистов. 4 из 5 пострадавших это были телеоператоры, а нападавшие это, соответственно, полицейские и сотрудники охранных фирм. Опять же, для чего полиция занимается воспрепятствованием работы журналистов, непонятно, так как в Казахстане по-прежнему сохранено право телефонного звонка, то есть неугодный репортаж или сюжет всегда можно снять. Вот. Говоря о правах самих журналистов, мало кто обращается в судебные органы, так как никто не верит в справедливые решения суда. Также хотелось бы отметить, что на протяжении 2 лет уже журналисты не могут зарегистрировать свой профсоюз. Минюст придумывает всевозможные отписки, либо теряет документы. Имеют место быть аресты и необоснованные задержания журналистов при исполнении ими профессиональных своих обязанностей. То есть их задерживают, 2 часа продержат, отберут камеру и назад отпускают. Вот. И хотелось бы сказать, что прокуратура должным образом не реагирует на такие вещи. Более того, сейчас очень актуальна для нас проблема языка ненависти. И более того, уже дважды в СМИ звучали оправдания и даже пропаганда фашизма касательно политики Гитлера, но прокуратура никоим образом не отреагировала.
Пожалуйста, заканчивайте. Media Law Institute, to be followed by Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under Helsinki Final Act, the states should ensure conditions for journalist activity from other states. This principle works in stable democracies because no true democracy is genuine democracy without freedom of speech. By all these freedom of expression principles also implies the responsibility of a journalist and media in general to provide true, balanced, impartial and objective information, e.g. media should deliver their role in democratic society. But these 4 principles seem to have no effect in the view of the last year since our previous meeting here in Warsaw in 2013. Propaganda of war, incitement of national, racial, and religious hatreds, hostility, or violence. This is the real work of the state-funded organizations which are present here, which are called Russian media, and which played significantly negative role influencing the conflict in my country. Ukraine, Europe, and all democracies countries faced in the challenge of the new government and the new government media environment where well-funded entities were the mask of media could successfully construct virtual reality, mixing some real pictures with totally fake stories, such as about clashes in Crimea, shown the picture from Grushevskoy Street in Kiev, or about someone killed by Ukrainian army girl, and someone has in fact died in an incident some 2 years ago. Activities of such fake media pose a serious threat to the media to the freedom of speech because the watchdogs of democracy suddenly transform in the hot dogs of authoritarian regime. We therefore would like to urge international community to call propagandists as they are, propagandists and not media workers. And we have convinced that propaganda tools should not be entitled by privileges and guarantees which are originally foreseen through media. I mean for those outlets and journalists who act in good faith and deliver their important role in democratic society. We have heard that the Russian delegation is worried about some imagined Nazi in Ukraine. Well, we have some another concern to share with them since closure of Ukrainian media in Crimea and Donbass committed by so-called green men or Russian soldiers who went in vacation to Ukraine seem much more in style of neo-Nazi policy, such like the illegal annexation of Crimea in itself in subsequent underground persecution of Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar minorities in Crimea. And the last, it's more safe to eat this Polish apple neither to watch or rather to watch Russian media. Thank you.
Kyrgyzstan to be followed by European Center for Artsakh.
Добрый день, господа. Здравствуйте, председатель. Я представляю государственный уполномоченный орган в сфере развития информационного рынка. Кыргызская республика может гордиться тем, что опередила многих соседей по региону в вопросах развития свободы слова и средств массовой информации. Это один из главных завоеваний нашей страны. В стране никаких препятствий для свободной регистрации средств массовой информации не существует. Отсутствует какая-либо государственная цензура. Надо заметить, что Кыргызстан сейчас переходит вместе со всеми странами региона на цифровой формат вещания и пригласила к разработке главных документов по данному процессу частных вещателей. В частности, в Кыргызстане предусмотрено участие в государственном пакете каналов частных телерадиоорганизаций, и также государство на безвозмездной основе выделило 2 мультиплекса, существующим на момент принятия программы частным вещателям. Законодательство, регулирующее деятельность средств массовой информации в Кыргызстане, весьма либерально. В частности, Конституция Кыргызской Республики запрещает привлекать к уголовной ответственности за клевету. На законодательном уровне зафиксированы права журналистов, для которых не существует запретных тем, включая критику действий первых лиц страны. Но в то же время медиасфера Кыргызстана переживает тоже проблемы и сталкивается со следующими угрозами. Наблюдается снижение доверия общества к СМИ. Как свидетельствуют опросы, у нас количественный рост не перешел в качественный. И в ситуации, когда рекламный рынок недостаточно развит, в борьбе за зрительскую аудиторию у нас прибегают к распространению слухов и недостоверной информации. И в связи с этим мы видим перспективу в саморегуляции СМИ и обращаемся к ОБСЕ, возможно, в перспективе рассмотреть такое направление сотрудничества, которое помогло бы позволить активизировать саморегуляцию СМИ. Спасибо.
Спасибо. European Center for Artsakh to be followed by the Institute of Mass Information.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I strongly believe that long-lasting peace is achievable only in framework of ensuring the fundamental freedoms, human rights and democratic principles. In the case of Nagorno-Karabakh and Azerbaijan conflict, these will lead to working out mechanisms and instruments to the peaceful coexistence of 2 independent countries. Mutual respect and recognition of human rights is the only path to reconciliation for the Armenian and Azerbaijani peoples. This can be done only through inclusive dialogue between representatives of civil society. But the grave situation with fundamental freedoms and rights in Azerbaijan poses a serious challenge on people-to-people contacts between civil society representatives in the conflicting parties. It is truly unfortunate that a number of well-known civil society peace activists and journalists have been arrested in the grounds of having contacts with Armenians. The existence of political prisons of peace activists in the OSCE participating state is a serious challenge to the whole OSCE community. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to make some proposals. To the participating states and OSCE institutions, contribute to the restoration of people-to-people contacts between the civil society representatives of the conflicting parties and to OSCE representative on freedom of the media. Organize joint events with journalists across different sides of the conflict in status neutral manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Institute of Mass Information to be followed by Association of Internet Service Providers in Tajikistan.
Thank you. My colleagues from Ukraine have already told about our main challenges, and you have heard yourself how actually we are described by Russian Federation like virus Ebola, like orange illness, and you have been already, even you, subject to some manipulations. You have heard representatives of the TV channel owned by Russian Defense Ministry, TV channel Zvezda, who told just blatant lies. And we are called fascists, we are called Nazis, and we see the immediate result of this aggression promoted by Russian media in the real life. They kill people by their informational war, and they target journalists as well. Over 80 journalists were taken hostages by pro-Russian forces during the last several months in Ukraine. Right now, 6 journalists are kept as hostages by pro-Russian forces. 2 of them are kept over 2 months. We don't know how they are kept. What are the conditions? Are they tortured? We have no access, no information at all. This is terrible. Ukraine has turned into a real hotspot of Europe. We lived for 23 years without the war, and now we have to face new challenges. The first challenge is, of course, this informational war. And I want to call on leading media and the world community to use your authority to protect your audience from lies which are spread by Russian Federation. And Russia has turned information into weapon, and it is a new challenge for the world community which should be assessed. It is a kind of hybrid war. The second, I would like to ask to remember about those hostages and to raise this question to Russia and pro-Russian forces, because this is a Russian aggression in Ukraine. At the same time, we are trying to promote media reform in Ukraine, and I'm very proud for my colleagues, for my civic activists who are working now to promote transparency of media ownership, who are working to promote public broadcasting in Ukraine, and we need also your support in this and your expertise, because we want Ukraine to turn into a democratic country. We want to be very different from Putin's Russia. And thank you for your support.
Thank you. Association of Internet Service Providers in Tajikistan to be followed by public organization HOMA.
Thank you.
Association of Internet Service Providers in Tajikistan.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. In the context of the freedom of media, as chair of the Association of ISPs of Tajikistan, I would like to address the following 2 issues: internet blocking that are violating the national and international laws, and monopolistic approach in transition from analog to digital broadcasting. Internet continues to be blocked without any legal basis in Tajikistan. For example, YouTube has been blocked already twice during this year. First time in June, as it was mentioned earlier, and the second time it was blocked on July 9, and as of today, it has been unblocked yet. The problem is that it is not only violate the national and international laws that Tajikistan is binded to. But this uncertainty in regulation of telecommunication market brings a range of economic challenges, losing current and potential local and international investors and remaining in the periphery of the region's telecommunication market are two of them. That is a paradox for a country who worked hard for 11 years to achieve membership of WTO. At the same time, this norms-violating regulation makes members of association and other telecom operators look as scapegoat. From one hand, they are ordered by regulator to block websites, and from the other, they are blamed by the same regulator on violating rights of customers. This approach of the state regulatory authority undermines rather than strengthens the rule of law in society. The second issue is about threats of the monopolistic approach that the state regulation has been implementing for migration to digital broadcasting in the country. The digital switchover process is not the sole interest of authorities in TV and radio broadcasting, that abuses of its monopoly.
Please
position.
conclude.
The total monopoly in this process and content production leads to an unhealthy situation, not only politically but economically. What Tajikistan has been doing so far within this process is leading to reducing the number of broadcasters by preventing private TV channels to participate in this transformation and to exist in post-switchover period.
Thank you.
Please
conclude.
Ladies and gentlemen, my fellow compatriots, as a landlocked country, Tajikistan needs to break any kind of monopoly in economic and political relations. Time of monopoly is over. At least this is what the independent Tajikistan is interested in and has been investing for since the beginning of its independence, mentioning strategic actions for expanding the network of roads within...
I apologize, I have to stop you.
The last one, in order to use the advantages of these opportunities, we have to understand simple principles. Operating with the tools of yesterday to manage today's opportunities does not work. We need internet more than internet needs us. And we need digital switchover to strengthen our broadcasting capacity and build the information society. This is, in conclusion, I'd like us to point out that internet and digital broadcasting are not the end, they are means to the end, which is development of our country. Thank you.
Thank you. I was told that we have 9 delegations that want to exercise their right of reply. Therefore, we have to cut, and because many of you spoke far too long, we have to cut the speaking time to 60 seconds. Public organization Hama to be followed by Mertek Media Monitor.
Я хочу обратить внимание на то, что в 2012 году была довольно положительная, тенденция в Таджикистане. Была декриминализирована 2 статьи Уголовного кодекса, 135-я клевета и 136-я, и 330-я статья Уголовного кодекса Кодекса оскорбления представителей власти остался без изменений. Хочу очень коротко подчеркнуть о ситуации перехода на цифровое вещание. К большому сожалению, Таджикистан, подписав соглашение Женевы 2006, и на следующий год в июне должен полностью отключить аналоговые вещания. К большому сожалению, до сих пор в Таджикистане абсолютно не существует законодательной базы в связи с переходом на цифровое вещание. Должно быть изменено и 7 законов в связи с этим переходом. Абсолютно не включены независимые телекомпании мультиплексы. Сформулировано сегодня только один мультиплекс за счет 4 государственных каналов и 8 иностранных каналов. И есть очень важный момент в Таджикистане, что Таджикистан чуть ли не единственная страна в мире, где лицензирование на производство является сегодня самым таким опасным моментом, который мешает развитию телевещания в Таджикистане и отсутствием национального контента. Спасибо.
Спасибо вам. Mertek to be followed by Sejena per l'informazione.
Thank you. I represent a Hungarian NGO here, and I have a bad news for you. Despite all of the strong international critiques, the media legislation in Hungary is still in force. And I have to say that the situation is even worse since then, because there are several new ways to put political pressure on media companies in Hungary. First, about the legislation, I just mentioned 2 important consequences of the media law. It gives the basis of operating public service broadcasting as a propaganda tool. And it is also a tool for the one-party media authority to restructure the radio broadcasting market. Practically, the independent voices disappeared from the Hungarian radio market. Secondly, there is a systematic domesticating of the private media. For example, changing ownership structure, state advertising, and there are also other regulatory steps like media tax.
Please conclude. Yeah.
My conclusion is that there is no media policy in professional sense in Hungary. We have only very strong political intervention. Thanks.
Thank you. OSCE Jenna to be followed by Set My People Free. OSCE Jenna.
It's my time. Only a few words considering the time. Voglio dire che la preoccupazione che ci coinvolge tutti per ciò che accade di drammatico, di terribile in Ucraina, in alcuni paesi dell'est europeo e dell'Asia, non può essere un alibi per i paesi occidentali più liberi per non guardare su ciò che accade a casa loro. Sta succedendo, e ci sono vari segnali, sono stati ricordati anche qui, che le minacce, le intimidazioni, gli abusi della legge contro i giornalisti si stanno diffondendo come una nuova malattia che realizza una forma di censura nuova. Ecco, le istituzioni, le ONG devono coprire il vuoto di informazione che c'è, perché le leggi esistenti non sono sufficienti, dobbiamo avere un quadro della situazione e cercare dei rimedi.
Thank you. Set My People Free to be followed by ICLA.
I'm very thankful that all of you emphasize freedom of speech. I think it is very key. Without freedom of speech, actually there is no freedom. Freedom starts with freedom of speech. Freedom of speech and freedom of media are very linked. If there is no freedom of media, there is no freedom of speech. You do not have freedom of speech if you cannot promote it. If no one can hear your speech, there is no use to have freedom of speech. Without freedom of speech, there is no equality. Freedom of speech empowers the weak and the poor. Control of information is power. The first step to control people is to stop freedom of speech. This is why I think it is very key to continue to push this. Man always longs for freedom, as he is created free. Without freedom, man is handicapped. His need for freedom is as his need for oxygen. Lack of freedom takes life out of him. Knowing the truth set man free. Speech and hearing are very crucial for development of the human being. This is what is legal outside the net should be legal in the net. Outlawing what's lawful outside the internet from being posted is stripping the individual from his freedom of speech and infringing on his freedom. And actually, the internet has given power to the individual because most of the media is with a certain agenda. Finally, truth, never afraid of being challenged or questioned. Critical thinking and freedom of expression are crucial for development. Growth and knowledge, it is key for accountability and the well-being of the community. And this is why you find that the deaf and the dumb is really handicapped and they are not developed. So we need to stand for this. And my fear is of two things. My fear
Excuse me,
is
please
of,
conclude.
Okay, yes. Defaming religion is one of the things. If I say that I don't believe that Muhammad is a prophet from God, I am accused of blasphemy. This is a big problem. And so I should be free to express my belief.
Thank you very much. Thank you. International Civil Liberties Alliance to be followed by Public Association Journalist.
Le 2 juillet dernier, l'État français a condamné une de ses citoyennes, Mme Christine Tazin, à 3 000 € d'amende pour avoir déclaré publiquement lors d'une discussion en pleine rue, je cite, « L'islam est une saloperie, c'est un danger pour la France ». En violation claire de tous ses engagements au sein de l'OSCE, la France rétablit ainsi le délit de blasphème en criminalisant la critique d'une religion. Il est pourtant systématiquement répété ici au sein de l'OSCE que la liberté d'expression comprend la possibilité d'émettre des discours provocateurs ou choquants, ce qui est le cas ici. L'International Civil Liberty Alliance demande à la France de bien vouloir clarifier sa position en répondant à la question suivante. Déclarer publiquement que l'islam ou toute autre religion est une saloperie, est-il encore un droit protégé par l'État français, oui ou non? Je rappelle que la loi islamique, la charia, interdit toute critique de l'islam. Cette interdiction du blasphème est la raison de l'intense pression exercée par les pays de l'OCI à l'encontre de tous les pays garantissant la liberté d'expression, et ce, dans le but de faire interdire et de pénaliser toute critique de l'islam. Cette pression incessante s'exerce également depuis des années au sein de l'OSCE. Ces manœuvres visent à faire accepter l'usage par l'OSCE du concept incohérent d'islamophobie tel que défini par la Turquie. Je conclus.
Once again, I request those who have written statements to send them to the distribution services and also focus on the recommendations.
The recommendation now, I conclude. Nous demandons à l'OSCE et à la France en particulier de veiller à ne pas laisser le concept de l'islamophobie contaminer le vocabulaire et les législations des États participants. Il est en effet extrêmement important de continuer à pouvoir distinguer la critique d'une religion, qui est un droit protégé lié à la liberté d'expression, et les actes de violence à l'encontre des musulmans, qui doivent bien évidemment être réprimés. Merci.
Thank you. Public Association Journalist, to be followed by Center of Research and Protection of Fundamental Rights.
Уважаемые господа, то, что я хотел бы представить, является совместным место с Институтом медиаполиси видением ситуации по свободе слова в Кыргызстане. Существующий ныне плюрализм мнений в кыргызстанских СМИ является одним из самых больших наших достижений, которым мы можем по праву гордиться. Однако мы вынуждены постоянно его отстаивать, в первую очередь это от различных законодательных инициатив. Так, с принятием новой редакции Конституции были созданы предпосылки для декриминализации статьи клевета и оскорбления. Но в то же время постоянно предпринимаются попытки вернуть дубинку в виде уголовного наказания для устрашения журналистов. Так, в этом году президентом страны подписан закон об уголовной ответственности за заведомо ложное сообщение о совершении преступления. Другой важный момент касается отношений власти к СМИ. Часто со стороны госчиновников можно услышать недовольство деятельностью местных медиа и качеством журналистских материалов. Надо признать, что часть этих претензий справедлива. Однако же самим государством мало что делается или сделано, чтобы создать условия, способствующие развитию и цивилизованной работе средств массовой информации. Наши рекомендации традиционные, но в то же время актуальны. Не принимать закон, умаляющий права и свободу журналистов, содействует созданию благоприятных условий для развития СМИ в Кыргызстане.
Спасибо. Center for Research and Protection of Fundamental Rights, to be followed by Legal Media Center. Center for Research and Protection of Fundamental Rights.
Здравствуйте. 18 июня 2014 года новостное агентство БНС обратилось с жалобами к властным структурам в связи с массовым прослушиванием телефонных разговоров журналистов. Прослушивались и производились записи 17 работающих и уже давно не работающих в новостном агентстве БНС журналистов. До этого 7 ноября 2013 года постановлением участкового суда города Вильнюс Литвы редактор БНС обязывался сотрудникам службы специальных расследований раскрыть тайный источник информации, а также санкционировалось произведение обыска и изъятие компьютерной техники. Впоследствии Вильнюсский окружной суд констатировал, что судья первой инстанции нарушил законодательство. 18 августа 2014 года Вильнюсский окружной суд удовлетворил жалобы 10 работающих и бывших сотрудников БНС и отменил постановление Вильнюсского участкового суда от 2 ноября 2013 года. В отношении некоторых журналистов в Литве возбуждаются уголовные дела. На русскоязычные СМИ в Литве производится постоянное давление. В отчет Департамента государственной безопасности об оценке угроз национальной безопасности за 2013 год русскоязычные СМИ, Литовский курьер, Обзор, Экспресс-неделя и Первый Балтийский канал были обозначены как инструменты влияния России, воплощающие в жизнь задачи ее информации-идеологической политики. В отношении русскоязычных журналистов постоянно оказывается давление И слова любых правозащитников, а также политических деятелей русскоговорящей диаспоры искажаются и подвергаются факты выдергиванию. Русскоязычная община постоянно провоцируется на какие-то необоснованные мероприятия, хотя русскоязычная община постоянно надеялась на развитие диалога и взаимопонимания с властями.
Спасибо
и поэтому
большое.
она просит обратить внимание международного сообщества на существующие проблемы в Литве.
Legal Media Center to be followed by Organization of Veterans.
Добрый день. Хотя после выступлений моих коллег из Азербайджана, России и Украины у меня складывается впечатление, что в Казахстане все, в общем-то, неплохо, но я остановлюсь на некоторых проблемных моментах. Первая проблема – это практически полный финансовый контроль государства за СМИ. Ежегодно наше правительство вливает около 200 миллионов евро в нашу прессу. При этом деньги не идут на развитие медиарынка, а лишь его угнетают и убивают, поскольку это, по сути, покупка лояльности нашей прессы. Вторая проблема – это новые законодательные акты. Самые печальные – это до 10 лет лишения свободы за распространение ложной информации, которая приведет к нарушению общественного порядка, и запрет журналистам присутствовать на заседаниях нашего правительства. Теперь эти заседания проходят за закрытыми дверями, журналисты довольствуются пресс-релизами и общением с пресс-центром. И третья проблема – это дефамационные иски против журналистов. Самый резонансный из них – это дело Валерия Сурганова, газеты «Мегаполис» и «Уральская неделя». При этом суммы возмещаемого морального вреда ничем не аргументируются, не регулируются и достигают 400 тысяч евро к журналистам. Ну и закончить мне хотелось бы нетрадиционно на оптимистичной все-таки ноте. Сейчас в Казахстане готовится новый проект нового гражданского кодекса, в котором учтены практически все рекомендации медийных НПО в части разрешения дефамационных споров. Спасибо.
Спасибо вам. Organization of Veterans of Anti-Hitlerite Coalition of World War II living in Lithuania, to be followed by Public Fund for Support and Development of Independent Print Media and News Agencies of Uzbekistan.
Спасибо. Я хочу говорить о праве на память, о защите чести и достоинства участников Второй мировой войны, сражавшихся на стороне антигитлеровской коалиции. В настоящее время в Литве рассматривается вопрос о снятии воинских захоронений советских воинов, советской символики. Что же тогда останется? Пустые памятные плиты, памятные стены и стелы. Так вытирается память у целого поколения. Также ставится вопрос о снятии ансамбля памятников Зеленого моста Вильнюса. К сожалению, и в этом вопросе никто не поинтересовался мнением ветеранов. Что они думают об этом? Ведь они шли на войну, победили фашизм именно с этими символами. Никто не учитывает и вычисляет их из диалога власти с гражданским обществом. Ведь их мнение тоже важно. Подумаем, с каким чувством они уходят из жизни. Спасибо.
Спасибо. Public Fund for Support and Development of Independent Print Media of Uzbekistan to be followed by Canada.
Уважаемые дамы и господа, не соглашаясь с отдельными замечаниями в области СМИ, озвученными некоторыми участниками совещания, отмечу, что состояние информационной сферы необходимо оценивать и рассматривать в динамике, а не на основе отдельных вычлененных фактов, которые отмечаются повсеместно в пространстве ОБСЕ. В соответствии, за последнее время в Узбекистане принято более 10 законов в области средств массовой информации. В частности, в соответствии с концепцией, принятой в 2010 году, в марте 2014 года, принят закон Республики Узбекистан об открытой деятельности органов государственной власти и управления. Закон предусматривает улучшение механизмов обеспечения доступа СМИ к информации с учетом современных международно признанных стандартов, таких как сокращение сроков рассмотрения обращений средств массовой информации, совершенствование правовых механизмов участия СМИ в осуществлении эффективного общественного контроля за деятельностью органов государственной власти и управления, введение административной ответственности юридических и должностных лиц за нарушения, связанные с обеспечением доступа к информации. Все это существенным образом поднимет более качественный новый уровень обеспечения свободы слова и информации в Узбекистане. Спасибо.
Спасибо. Canada to be followed by Holy See.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Dear Dunia, thank you for your unequivocal stance on freedom of the media. You and your team should be an inspiration for all of us. Canada's statement will be distributed together with our recommendations, and I'd like now to focus on two brief points. First point, while the OSCE region is focused on Russia's overt aggression against Ukraine and the senseless deaths that have occurred as a result of it, We must not ignore the dangerous acceleration of restrictions on the internet and the crackdown on independent media and opposition voices in Russia itself. These actions are in contravention of OSCE commitments and must concern us all. Second point, as we witness an intense campaign of disinformation against Ukraine by Russian state-controlled media, let's not forget that the seemingly anonymous green men we have seen in Crimea and eastern Ukraine have their online equivalents. Thank you.
Thank you. Holy See to be followed by Armenia.
Mr. Moderator, freedom of expression is certainly among the main preconditions of free societies. It represents a keystone of democracy. So strengthening the principle and practices of a free, professional and responsible media is the most sustainable way of encouraging a media culture that works towards building peace. Only media that is vibrant, fair, independent, and beyond censorship can contribute to a genuine dialogue and reconciliation across divides. Accurate reporting of this, full explanation of matters of public concern, and fair representation of diverse points of view must then always be fostered. At the same time, distortions that occur when the media industry becomes self-serving and solely profit-driven, losing the sense of accountability to the common good must be resolutely avoided and prevented by all legal means. One must also be aware that beyond being informative, media outlets are also formative with responsibility to service the common good, to the truth, goodness, and beauty. Therefore, seen from an ethical viewpoint, one must always keep in mind that freedom of expression and freedom of the media are not absolute. There are obvious instances such as slander and insult, hate and conflict fostering messages among individuals and groups, indecency and pornography, or the explicit depiction of various forms of violence, where no right to communicate exists. Plainly, to free expression should always observe principles like truth, fairness, and respect for privacy and family life. Hence, professional communication should always be actively involved in developing and enforcing ethical codes and behavior for their profession in cooperation with public representatives, as it's stated in the Ministerial Council decisions 1306 and 1007. I have a longer statement, but I will distribute it in written. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much. Armenia to be followed by the Liberal Group at the Parliamentary Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Since my freedom of expression is restricted to 1 full minute, I would circulate my full version of my statement, and now I will concentrate on some points, but of course this will not impede me to offer my thanks and gratitude to Ms. Dunja Mijatovic for her valuable contribution to the protection of freedom of expression in the OSCE area. First, should be mentioned that protection of freedom of expression is the best indicator of overall human rights situation. If we are to speak nowadays on the existence of any standard of civilization that states should comply with in order to be an equal member of international community, the freedom of expression will come the first. The safety and protection of journalists should be ensured in the framework of reconciliation and the right to the truth. Unfortunately, there are consistent efforts to silence voices of peace and reconciliation in the OSCE area. The stigmatization and persecution of journalists and civil society members who are involved in confidence-building measures under the charges of espionage activities are taking dangerous precedents. Finally, I would like to submit a relevant recommendation to the participating states to refrain from persecuting journalists and civil society representatives involved in the confidence-building measures within the conflict-related environment. I thank you.
Thank you very much. The Secretary of the Liberal Group on the OSCE to be followed by Union of Journalists of Moscow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The fundamental freedoms, including the freedom of speech and on information, are of utmost importance for the people. They have to be implemented in an efficient way. A cornerstone is the European Convention of Human Rights. This convention should still be improved by the impact it has. A further important step forward was a Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, which became binding with the Lisbon Treaty and has to be followed by the institution of the European Union. We, the Liberal Group in the Assembly of the OSCE, would be happy if these mentioned standards could be followed by all constitutions in the countries of the OSCE and could provide an effective protection. Unfortunately, this is not the case yet, as we heard from the whole discussions, and we hope that this may improve in the next 3 or 4 years. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Union of Journalists of Moscow, to be followed by Tajikistan. Please, microphone.
Дуня, дамы и господа, я представляю 15-тысячную армию московских журналистов. Наши выступления, а также видеоматериалы будут показаны послезавтра на параллельном заседании. Сейчас я хочу выполнить одну очень важную миссию. Здесь очень много говорили о вкладе госпожи Дуни в защиту свободы слова и защиту журналистов. Я хочу вручить госпоже Дуни диплом Союза журналистов Москвы в связи с ее юбилеем и за ее замечательную деятельность. Андрея мне помочь. Госпожа Дуня награждается за активную деятельность по защите прав журналистов, по отстаиванию свободы слова и независимости в связи с юбилейной датой. Поздравляю.
Thank you, Union of Journalists of Moscow. Tajikistan, to be followed by Independent Human Rights Organization of Uzbekistan.
Спасибо большое, господин председатель. Я Банавшева Динаева, заместитель министра культуры Республики Таджикистан. У меня буквально несколько слов. О развитии демократических процессов в стране, конечно, можно судить по степени обеспечения свободы слова. Законодательная база Таджикистана в области СМИ предоставляет все возможности для их полного функционирования. И, на мой взгляд, это и есть, как отметила в своем выступлении Дуня Миятович, выражение политической воли государства. В 2013 году был принят новый закон о печати и других средств массовой информации с учетом предложений и замечаний как раз-таки и независимых средств массовой информации и гражданского общества. Если говорить о цифре, то они достаточно, о статистике, то достаточно, мне кажется, большие цифры. Например, общее число печатных СМИ составляет 527. И надо отметить, что только за последний год их число возросло на 50, и 70% из них это не государственные средства массовой информации. Конечно, и немного отличается ситуация в электронных СМИ. Это 9 государственных каналов, 20 частных, 7 государственных радио и 9 частных каналов. Некоторые результаты исследований, проведенных в Таджикистане по средствам массовой информации, представили некоторые выводы и рекомендации, среди которых были отмечены проблемы доступа к информации, а также недостатки самих журналистов, которые не могут или не хотят использовать инструменты, которые определены в законодательстве нашей страны. Также я хотела бы сказать, что средства массовой информации, конечно, должны нести также ответственность перед гражданами за ее распространение. И это тоже определено законодательством нашей страны. Количество СМИ, конечно, достаточно веский показатель свободы слова в стране, но, к сожалению, это еще не качество. И вот вопрос перехода количества в качество, мне кажется, это и есть то направление, в котором мы должны консолидироваться, как государственный сектор, так и общественные неправительственные организации. Спасибо за внимание.
Спасибо. Independent Human Rights Organization of Uzbekistan, to be followed by Russia.
По поводу свободы выражения ничего похвального не могу сказать. Журналисты, телевидение, корреспонденты разных газет в последнее время начали критику в бытовом уровне. В последнее время государством много уделяется внимания к работе СМИ, журналистов. Принимаются новые законы по свободе выражения, по свободе СМИ и информации, включая защиту журналистов, вовлеченных в опасной профессиональной миссии. Я не могу совмещать, что я не сомневаюсь, что в ближайшее время может появиться такие журналисты. Актуальной задачей в настоящее время является формирование условий для дальнейшего эффективной консолидации усилий институтов гражданского общества и органов государственной власти и управления социально-экономическим развитием страны, построения правового демократического государства. Много уделяется внимания гражданскому обществу, как Махаля. Обращаясь к гражданам к нам по правовым вопросам, мы стараемся решать проблемы через Махалинский комитет, а также мы обращаемся в Махалинский комитет по решению проблемы, связанных с по семейным обстоятельствам. Кроме того, мы стараемся участвовать в семинарах, проводимых специалистами правоохранительных органов.
Пожалуйста, заканчивайте.
По правам человека, по правовым государствам. Спасибо за внимание.
Russia Today, you are the last one.
My name is Paula Slier. I'm the Middle East Bureau Chief for RT. I've just returned from Ukraine after spending several months reporting for RT from there. So what I'm telling you is first-hand experience. It is extremely dangerous for journalists working for Russian media or Russian journalists to report from there. Can you imagine that when I'm on the front line reporting, I'm being told by commanders to take off the word press that is written on my bulletproof jacket because it endangers the lives of their fighters. People tell me that they're afraid to talk to the media because they're being told that journalists are being targeted by the Ukrainian army. We have to interview people by covering their faces. At checkpoints, they tell us that their families will be picked up if they're recognized. At the same time, we cover people's faces in Kiev because they're afraid to be identified. I receive death threats, about half a dozen a day, for the reporting I do in eastern Ukraine. My colleagues are refused entry to go into Ukraine. RT has asked numerous occasions for ATO accreditation so that we can travel through the Ukrainian checkpoints and film in those areas. And without fail, that has been refused repeatedly. There are very few...
Thank you. Please conclude. We pass to the right of reply. We have 11 delegations and 7 minutes. The first in my list is Azerbaijan.
Thank you very much. I would like to reply the comments that already done by international organizations, delegations, and local organizations from Azerbaijan. I should say surely that some journalists or media representatives were not detained, civil or political activity as claimed by some international organizations and local organizations. The clear charges determined based on the test materials and proofs presented to Minister of Tax and Minister of Finance based on a decision of court. There are charges on criminal codes, article swindle, illegal business, evasion from payment of taxes, fake of official documents, great deal bribery, and other articles. Criminal does not recognize a profession. While the case is under the investigation, any early judgment and politically motivated statements are nothing but attempts to interfere into and exert pressure on the investigation of it is also absolutely unacceptable from the rule of law's point of view. As is well known, Azerbaijan has always been supportive to intercommunal dialogue between Azerbaijan and Armenian communities of the Nagorno-Karabakh region of the Republic of Azerbaijan. We believe that such a dialogue conducive to mutual understanding and confidence will significantly contribute to the peace process as a whole. But unfortunately, no participating countries did not mention about elementary rights of refugees and IDPs that fired out by the aggressor country when started the war. Representing themselves as a human rights defenders or representative of human rights organizations are closing their eyes towards these violations of the refugees and IDPs' rights. The conflict was announced between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Nagorno-Karabakh was occupied by the Armenians. The delegations of the Republic of Azerbaijan would like to make statements regarding the agenda of the current session. Would like to underline that it is known in accordance to the Permanent Council decision.
I apologize, but we really don't have time for long speeches.
Okay, so just
I'm really sorry.
last sentence. Okay. It is known in accordance to the Permanent Council of decision. The OSCE comments regarding the protection of journalists are reflected on the documents of the Moscow meeting of the Conference on the Human Rights Dimension in 1991. Thank you.
Thank you. Georgia, to be followed by Ukraine.
Thank you, moderator. I would like to draw your attention to a very concerning trend which is unfolding around the occupation line of Georgia's Abkhazia and Tskhinval region. A number of journalists have been literally kidnapped by the occupation forces and were kept in illegal detention facilities. In the recent case, on April 15, 2014, Russian occupation forces captured 3 Georgian journalists of a private broadcaster TV3 who were reporting on the illegal practices of the restriction of freedom of movement across the occupation line. Georgian journalists were released from the Tskhinval detention facility after 48 hours of illegal captivity and only after the direct involvement of co-chairs of Geneva international discussions. In flagrant violation of the international law and several conventions, the occupation forces continue to threaten media representatives and infringe upon journalists' rights in situations of conflicts and tensions. We once again call on the occupation forces and the Russian Federation as a party to the conflict, which exercise effective control on the occupied territories, to stop the illegal practices of unlawful detentions and restrictions of journalists' rights and comply with the international law as well as established norms of international behavior. Thank you.
Thank you. Ukraine, to be followed by Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I exercise my right of reply to the statements made by the delegation of the Russian Federation and a number of Russia state-controlled media outlets. 2 comments. First, Ukraine is fully committed to media freedom and will continue to cooperate closely with the Office of Representative on Freedom of the Media to promote free media environment in Ukraine. We regret the death of journalists, and all of their deaths must be thoroughly investigated. At the same time, I will reiterate that the hostilities in the east of Ukraine and the loss of life are a result of aggression from the Russian Federation, direct incursion of the Russian military forces, and its broad-ranging support to the militant and terrorist groups operating in the east of Ukraine. And therefore, the Russian Federation bears its responsibility for the loss of life in the east of my country. Second comment. International Federation of Journalists registered over 300 deaths and disappearances of journalists in the Russian Federation since 1993. Committee to Protect Journalists concluded that Russia was one of the deadliest countries in the world for journalists. Against this backdrop of this very sad record, it was the delegation of the Russian Federation which blocked the attempts of the Ukrainian OSCE chairmanship in 2013 and of the Lithuanian chairmanship in 2011 to adopt a decision in the OSCE on protection of journalists. Thus, Russia placed again into serious doubt its commitment to end impunity for crimes against journalists. Most worrying are the recent incidents of violence in Russia against journalists who wanted to report about the Russian servicemen killed in the east of Ukraine, to report from Pskov and Irkutsk. These incidents of intimidation and harassment show how enduring this atmosphere remains in the Russian Federation. And therefore, I would like to call on the delegation from Russia to implement its OSCE commitments, in particular relating to safety of journalists and to combating hate speech, which is now permeating the media of Russia. The Russia Today channel is notorious for its falsifications of developments in the east of the country, so I would not comment on what has been said by a representative of this channel. I would rather be interested why one of the editors of the channels resigned, claiming that she could not bear the lies from this channel. Thank you.
Turkey, to be followed by Lithuania.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Turkey has made important strides through the ambitious reform process in the last decade, aiming at strengthening freedom of expression and the media. We are determined to expand the scope of freedom of expression and will further address some of the shortcomings, also by continuing our cooperation with the representative on freedom of the media. The Internet law in Turkey was amended with the purpose of protecting personal rights and the right to privacy. The recent amendments to the relevant legislation do not foresee any restrictions on the freedom of communication or social networking. They aim to strike a balance between freedom of expression, individuals' rights, and the protection of privacy. With regard to the individuals referred to as imprisoned journalists in my country, I wish to stress the fact that journalists are not granted criminal immunity in any participating state if they commit crimes which are completely unrelated to journalistic activities or journalistic status, which is the case in my country. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Lithuania to be followed by Hungary.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Denis Radzevičius. I am chairman of Lithuanian Journalists Union and present also Commission of Radio and Television. I am happy to say very few remarks about some changes in Lithuania. One of them is related to BNS case, which was mentioned. Actually, after this case, we got big support from OSCE office, and we changed some law in Lithuania, and now we are happy about protection of information sources for journalists, because we have very strict rules how legal institutions can prosecute a journalist. And I guess this case shows how important it is to us to observe situation in all countries OSCE region. Second one is related to TV channels, Russian government-controlled or directly or indirectly channels, and hate speech cases, which we had in Lithuania. Very few of them, but actually in all of these cases, legal institutions decided that all kinds of propaganda or content can be provided in Lithuania. Only one exception: hate speech and war propaganda. Thank you.
Thank you. Hungary to be followed by the USA.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I would like to briefly react to the statements made by Mrs. Mijatovic, the distinguished US delegation, and one NGO. Since 2012, the Hungarian government has several times expressed its worry about the distribution of the Norway grants. Hungary's main criticism has been that Oktatás Foundation and other consortium foundations cooperating in the implementation are distributing the funds in a non-transparent way and not in accordance with the previous determined objectives. The Government Control Office, an autonomous managed central budgetary organization, is entitled by law to audit business companies and foundations using funds allocated or distributed by the central budget, conduct an investigation upon suspicion of irregularities with regards to the distribution of funds provided by the Norway civil grants. In addition, there is an ongoing police investigation against the Oktatás Foundation on suspicion of pursuing unauthorized financial activities. Both the Comprehensive Government Control Office inquiry and police investigations are conducted strictly in accordance with the respective law and regulations. As for the taxation of advertising revenues, the underlying principle of the new regulation adopted by the Parliament is that everyone should pay taxes according to their capacity and financial performance. Against all allegations, the advertising tax will not intrude into the internal operation of a single newspaper, television channel, or other media platform. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
USA to be followed by Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Russian delegate earlier suggested that there is a double standard at the OSCE. We refute that. We believe there's only a single standard, an OSCE standard. But that should be explored because it's a very serious allegation. The Russian delegate also stated that the Committee to Protect Journalists had reported on multiple violations of media freedom in the United States. I'd just like to say that my government would like to express its sincere appreciation for the work of the Committee to Protect Journalists. And we urge all countries to take its findings into account. I also would remind the Russian Federation that that same organization in its impunity index had ranked the Russian Federation 10th among the 12th worst countries in the world with regard to impunity for the murder of journalists. According to the committee. 36 journalists have been murdered in the Russian Federation, 32 of them murdered with impunity. The Russian delegation also suggested that in the Ferguson demonstrations after a very tragic death of an African-American youth, that journalists were swept up in the demonstration. It's unclear whether or not those journalists were targeted, but the very next day, President Obama publicly criticized the arrest of those journalists. He said, and I quote, "Police should not be bullying or arresting journalists who are trying to do their jobs and report to the American people on what they see on the ground." I am still waiting to hear President Putin make a statement about these people that have been murdered in the Russian Federation. I would recommend very strongly that the representative on freedom of the media convene a meeting on this issue of the double standard versus the single standard and invite the Committee to Protect Journalists to convene that meeting with OSCE ambassadors in Vienna. I can assure you the American ambassador will be there, and I hope the Russian ambassador will attend as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Latvia to be followed by France.
Mr. Chair, I would like to reply to the statements regarding freedom of the media and freedom of speech in Latvia. Regarding the temporary restriction placed on the Russian state-owned TV channel Rossiya, RTR, in April this year, this restriction was placed by the National Electronic Mass Media Council of Latvia. This was done temporarily for a period of 3 months in accordance with the provisions of our legislation. The Council concluded that RTR broadcasts repeatedly contain hate speech, incitement to war and military conflict, as well as ethnic and national hatred. This restriction pursued a legitimate aim and fully met the relevant international standards and OSCE commitments. Considering the well-known and, shall I say, sui generis content of the TV channels controlled by the Russian government, the fact that Russia today the fact that RTR, as well as other channels of that kind, today are freely available in Latvia, I think that testifies to the depth of our commitment to freedom of speech and freedom of the media. As for the amendments to the Latvian criminal law adopted this year, these criminalize glorification